Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 scary true graveyard horror stories, we step through the rusted gates of cemeteries where names are carved in stone. Flowers wither overnight and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling accounts of bells that toll without wind, whispers leaking from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps echoing across gravel paths when you know you are utterly alone. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, share in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there is a cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name, because once you step past the gates of these haunted resting grounds, not everything allows you to leave. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I'm not writing this for attention. I'm writing it because I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since October, and I need to put the story somewhere that isn't inside my head. If you want to call me a liar, fine. If you want to tell me I misheard things, go ahead. I know what I heard, and if you've ever lived near a creek that talks when it's in flood, you know how a place can learn your name. I went to a small college in western Massachusetts, the kind of campus where people jog past stone walls that look older than the country. My major was media studies, with an audio concentration that mostly meant I could untangle XLR cables without swearing. For a field assignment, our professor Ellis told us to capture natural night ambience at a location of our choice. Minimum 3 hours of continuous audio. Let the space speak, he said, like he was selling a meditation app. I decided on the Ridge Hill Cemetery, which sits on a long slope above a narrow creek the locals just call the Still. During the day, it's tame. Revolutionary War stones tilting like old teeth, maples that drop their leaves in a copper ring, a white church steeple pointing at the sky like a teacher's finger. At night, the town posts a chain at the gravel entrance, technically closed at dusk. Technically. I brought my roommate, Maya, because she was the kind of person who pretended she wasn't curious about haunted places, and then asked 1,000 questions when you got there. She had a knit hat pulled down to her eyebrows and a flashlight she refused to turn on because it ruins your night vision, which is something she read once and repeats like doctrine. We parked down the hill and crossed the chain on foot. It was an October night that smelled like damp leaves and the kind of cold that nips your nose but doesn't get into your bones. Down in the creek bed, water shushed over stones like somebody politely clearing their throat. 3 hours? She asked when I knelt between 2 graves with low, rounded stones. Neither had a name, just the year carved shallow, 1778 and 1779. I set my Zoom recorder on a small tripod and wrapped it in a fuzzy windscreen. I built a little ring of pebbles around it to remind some nocturnal raccoon that it was not food. We marked the spot with my scarf tied to a sapling, checked battery, checked SD card, hit record. The red LED made a tiny steady pulse like a heartbeat. Think we'll catch anything? Maya asked. Frogs, maybe an owl, I said. Cars on County Road, the creek. That's all I want. Noise floor, dynamic range, a nice spectrum. I said it like a person who believes the world behaves when you point equipment at it. We stood there a minute longer, listening. The creek's voice got in quick, a constant ribbon of hush. There was a high insect buzz. Every now and then a dry clack from the trees. Something small rustled in the grass. On the hill, a single streetlight threw a watery circle over the gravel, and I could see a motion sensor blinking on a mausoleum door like a tired eye. When we turned to go, a man's voice came from near the gate. Closed, he said, not loud, not angry. I swear we both stopped the way kids do when the teacher pops her head in the door. He stepped into the light. A round-shouldered guy in his 60s, a dark jacket with a patch over the pocket. Dugan printed in white. Groundskeeper. I'd seen him cutting grass in a slow, careful spiral, always with ear protection, always like the noise belonged to him. I'm sorry, I said. Class project? I'll come back for the gear first thing. He looked past us into the dark. His eyes did a quick bounce like he was counting heads out there. Don't leave anything after dark, he said. We've had kids, you know. Lighting candles. Knocking things down. I'll be here at 7, I said. He shifted his weight like his shoes hurt. Gates open 9, he said. I'll keep an eye. We thanked him, promised we'd be back. We walked out under the chain and back past the last houses, where a TV flickered blue inside one living room, and you could smell someone's onions in oil. In the car, Maya exhaled in a long hiss and laughed. "You and your dead guys," she said. "Let's get hot chocolate." In the morning, my hot chocolate was a mistake. It sat in my stomach like a stone while I hiked up there at 7 and found the chain still across the entrance and the gravel unmarked by tire tracks. I waited until 9:30. No sign of Dugan. In my head, I thought of raccoons with nimble hands unscrewing my windscreen, of rain that hadn't fallen, of teenagers with curiosity and bad judgment. I had class at 10. I had a quiz I'd pretended to study for. I swore and left. At 4, when the lab opened, I went to tell Ellis I'd have to redo the capture. He sat on the edge of a stainless table eating yogurt and did that thing where he squeezed the bridge of his nose like students were a sinus headache that never went away. I was still explaining when Chris, our TA, edges of his beard too precisely shaped to have been an accident, stepped in holding a Ziploc gallon bag. Inside it, my Zoom lay on its little tripod like a frog under a microscope. The windscreen was damp. There were smears of mud and something that looked like chalk dust on the plastic bag. "Security desk had it," Chris said. "Apparently the groundskeeper dropped it there." "I didn't go back," I said, relieved voice making a liar out of the words. I meant to." "Battery's dead," Chris said. "But your SD card's in there. If it ran all night, you'll have hours." Ellis wagged his yogurt spoon. "See? The space provides." In the lab, with the lights low and the windows looking like rectangles of rain, though it wasn't raining, I popped the card in and hit transfer. 5 hours, 42 minutes, 11 seconds. I felt the smug pride you get when a risk turns into a gift. I scrubbed to the start and listened in a pair of lab headphones that had a layer of other people's lives ground into the ear pads. The creek was there. White noise, smooth but textured, a sound with pebbles in it. Leaves ticked. Every now and then something in the grass skittered. A car passed on County Road, a Doppler slide. You could hear the high, bright hiss of the recorder's own preamp. I smiled because it was exactly what I needed. About 12 minutes in, the first whisper came. If you've ever done field recording, you know the difference between wind that climbs a microphone and a voice that has a shape. Wind is swells and troughs. A voice draws a pattern on the spectrogram like handwriting. This was handwriting. The levels didn't spike like breathing on a mic would. It came from the world, not the equipment. The word was a name. I didn't catch it the first time. You know how when you learn a new word and then you hear it everywhere? It happened like that. At 21 minutes, another name. A different voice. A different accent, Irish maybe, or the ghost of an Irish accent a few generations out. At 29, 2 more speaking low like people taking turns on a list. I listened harder and let it run and sat perfectly still, like stillness would make my ears better. There were little pockets when the creek was loud and the insects surged and nothing else came through. Then the voices would thread the noise again, steady, not rushing, not dramatic. Names. Some I knew from town, family names that showed up on real estate signs and on the basketball banners in the high school gym. Some were blunt and old-fashioned. Some sounded French. I started to write them down, catching spellings when I could, phonetics when I couldn't. At an hour 4, one voice spoke with a length of patience that made me think of someone who had spent his life waiting for other people to finish. He said Miriam, like he loved the sound of syllables. Then softer, Miriam Keene. At 1 hour, 12 minutes, 32 seconds, a voice came so close to the microphone that I flinched, even though the sound had already happened hours ago. It didn't spike the levels. It didn't pop. It just slipped into a space the creek left open and said my name, first, middle, last. Not how I ever introduced myself. Not how anyone says it except bureaucrats and that one telemarketer who read from a spreadsheet. Then it said here, not a question. A roll call answered on my behalf. I pulled the headphones off so fast the headphone jack clacked against the table. The lab was the same. Hum of the ventilation, blinking of the external drive's LED, a poster about microphone polar patterns curling where the tape had dried out. My hands were shaking hard enough to make the plastic case rattle. I told myself a real voice could have walked by. Dugan could have seen the little tripod and leaned down to see what it was. A kid could have been out there with a cigarette and a dare, and yet the creek never changed around the voice. The insects didn't pause. Even my own breathing didn't rise and fall in the recording the way it should have if a body had leaned in, if warm air had fogged cold plastic. The world didn't react to the voice because I think it wasn't in the air. It was in the seam between sounds, someplace thinner than air. I took the SD card and my notes and my fear and went to the library. Mrs. Kearney, who'd been there since the invention of dust, helped me navigate digitized town records like we were gossiping. When I asked about family names, she lit up and started telling me who married who, and which cousin had a problem with Oxy for a while but was back to himself now. When I asked about the cemetery, she dropped her voice like we were in church. "Ridge Hill," she said. The old section slid in the flood of 22. They moved what they could. Stones one place, bones another if you want the blunt of it. City Works crew found femurs in the roots of the big maple down there. Some folks said the creek would keep talking until everybody got put back right. But there's no money for that sort of thing. People say a lot of things. I asked if she knew a Dugan. "Donnie," she said. "Been out there forever. His wife was keen before she married. Miriam was his mother-in-law's sister, I think. She's in there somewhere." She made a loose circle in the air, meaning the hill, the ground, the creek, the town. That night, Maya listened with me at the kitchen table of our apartment. Our mugs breathing steam, our knees bumping. She held my pen and wrote down the names as they came. She tapped her nails when she was nervous and didn't know she was doing it. Every time a voice spoke, she stopped tapping like she was being a good audience for a ghost. "Say it," I whispered, when the moment came. "Your name," she whispered back. It said your name. We stopped it there. We didn't go on to the rest because it felt like a dare the dark had laid down. We watched sitcom reruns where nobody dies and nobody lives anywhere colder than a studio set. We slept with our bedroom doors open, which we never did because Maya snores and I talk in my sleep and neither of us enjoys a running critique. In the middle of the night, I woke to water sounds and sat up, thinking the kitchen tap had been left on. It hadn't. The radiator sighed. Outside, the empty street made the distant highway noise sound like a shore. In class the next day, Ellis made us play 10-minute clips and talk about texture. I didn't pick the part with the names because I didn't want to have a 20-person reaction to something I didn't have one for yet. I played 20 minutes of harmless creek and leaves and a far-off owl that hooted like a voice trying on a laugh for the first time. People nodded. Someone said liminal too many times. Chris asked what mic I'd used and what gain setting and if I'd done a high-pass filter. I measured my answers so they matched the person I'd been when I recorded it. After class, he followed me out into the hall. "You got anything else on there?" he asked, casual but watching my face like a cop does. "Why?" I asked, trying to sound like a person whose name had not been pulled once out of a night and handed back to her like a receipt. "Security said that groundskeeper came in before dawn," he said. He looked, I don't know, like he'd seen something show up when he wasn't expecting company. Chris scratched behind his ear. "If there's something interesting on that file, I can help clean it up. Pull the speech from the noise." "Let me listen to it first," I said. He gave me his email on a torn piece of paper so precise it could have been from a magic trick. We didn't talk about it for a few days. There was a game. There was a party that smelled like beer under 3 different colognes. There was homework and Maya's brother calling to tell her their mom's cat had finally decided to die in the laundry basket. I avoided the audio like it was a person in the grocery store I owed money to. When I finally put the headphones back on, I did it at noon with sunlight all over the kitchen floor like somebody had spilled it. There were more names. The cadence of them settled into me until I could tell when another was about to arrive. The way you can tell when a friend is about to ask so. I started to recognize some of the voices. The old man with the patient mouth. The woman whose R's curled like ribbon. The list never sped, never slowed. It didn't care that time had passed. It didn't care that I had. It kept doing what it did like a river does. At 3 hours, 11 minutes, the voices began to overlap lightly at first, then a little more like a chorus of people who insisted on finishing their turn, even if someone else had started. Behind it, a sound began that took me a few minutes to identify. It was stone moving against stone, distant. The shudder a tomb lid makes in horror movies when it shifts. It was realer than that. It had grit in it. At 4 hours 18 in a lull, someone said very clearly, "Counted wrong." That's when I emailed Chris. He came over, with a laptop and a little box that turns your desk into a studio, and smiled at Maya exactly once, like he'd remembered to include her in the world on purpose. He's good at this. He pulled the voice out of the creek without cutting the creek out of the voice. He laid tracks in a way that made a kind of geography you could navigate by ear. He ran a spectral display and we all watched the names bloom in faint blue and then sharpen as he filtered. He kept stopping to say, huh, but not the huh you say when you catch someone lying. The huh you say when the magic trick doesn't show you the false bottom and you know what you're seeing uses physics anyway. You could fake this, he said, thinking out loud. You'd need an actual chorus of voices and you'd need to be out there all night and you'd need to, I don't know, not breathe near the microphone. Or you could layer it in post, but your preamp noise is consistent and boring and I don't hear edits. He sat back. I hate that I don't have a better theory. What's the counted wrong about? Bones moved in the flood, I said. Maybe some never found their stones again. Maybe some stones never found their bones. That's not how that works, he said, but softly, like he wasn't totally sure who the rules applied to. At 4:50, a new voice arrived. It was so quiet we only heard it because Chris had gone over a 5-minute section twice. It didn't say a name. It said a date. It said tomorrow's date. Then it said 2. His cursor hovered. He looked at me. 2 what? He asked. 2 people, Maya said with that certainty she usually reserved for arguing about movie endings. 2 o'clock, I said, thinking of ambulances and corners taken too fast on wet roads. We didn't sleep. You can say that's hysterical. You can say I was primed. You'd be right. We stayed up watching the window turn gray and the sky refused to make a decision. At 10:50, my phone buzzed with a campus email about a vehicular incident at the intersection by the old bridge. 2 students, minor injuries, traffic rerouted. I looked at the date, at the number 2, at the way the line of the creek crossed the road under that bridge where names slide past on sticks and foam. Coincidence, Chris said. The good student. He said it twice like he was practicing. Then he stopped coming over. Maya told me I was making myself sick. She told me to take a break. I tried. I tried to be a person who goes to class and eats things off plates and doesn't sit with her head cocked like a dog listening for fireworks. The problem is that once you've heard the shape of voices in noise, you start to hear it in everything. In the dishwasher, in the dryer, in the wind where it comes under the door and gets changed by the crack. Sometimes I would hear my name again, not loud, not even clear. Just the idea of it braided into the hiss of life. I told myself I was pattern seeking. I told myself I was looking for myself because I'm a selfish person. I put my pillow over my head and the fabric made a beach out of my breath, and in that surf I heard the roll call start up. It didn't care that I'd hidden. One morning there was an envelope on our doormat. No stamp, no address. Inside was the Ziploc bag with my recorder in it. There was a note written in block letters. Found by the old soldiers, don't leave things after dark. Dugan. The bag smelled faintly like damp stone. When I pulled the recorder out, a fine pale dust sifted onto the table and made little constellations. I wiped it up with my sleeve and thought of mortar, chalk, bone. We went to thank him and found the cemetery gate chained. A handwritten sign said closed for maintenance. Mrs. Kearney told me quietly that Dugan had gone home sick, and would you believe it? He lived right over on Pine where the old cannery boss used to live. Imagine that small world. We brought muffins. His wife, small, stern eyes like a tired saint, took them and said he was sleeping. I said thank you for finding my recorder. She tilted her head like she was listening to something in the next room and said, he doesn't like leaving things alone out there. Says if it's yours at sundown, it won't be yours by sunup. Says the hill makes a claim. The next week, Chris stopped answering emails. We ran into someone who said he'd transferred to UMass because that program is a joke, but he said it like he was telling a joke he didn't think was funny. The week after that, the flood siren in town went off for the first time in years. Though the creek stayed where it was supposed to, the emergency management guy apologized on Facebook, said it had been a test triggered by accident. Comments under the post argued about infrastructure and budgets and God. In the second hour of a night where we promised not to listen, Maya heard something anyway. She was in the shower and I was in bed pretending to be asleep. Water makes the best noise for hiding a voice in. It's patient. It's broad. She came out with her towel around her and said, not looking at me. It said my name. I didn't say who. I didn't say what. I said when. She nodded like she'd been prepared to answer. Saturday. Morning? I said evening? She shrugged without humor. Just Saturday. On Saturday she didn't leave the house. Her shift at the coffee shop went to Erica, who texted a picture of the empty pastry case and a skeleton emoji. It snowed, the soft, useless kind of snow that melts as it lands. We watched a marathon of a show about people buying houses they couldn't afford. At 9:30 p.m., Maya took a deep breath and looked at the kitchen sink like it had insulted her. "I can't live like this," she said, and turned the faucet to full blast to fill the kettle for tea. She had her back to me. I saw the kettles shine. In the roar of water there was a syllable shaped exactly like the start of her name, and I hated myself for hearing it. The kettle bumped the lip of the sink and tipped, and I moved without thinking and caught it. The water raked my wrist. Not boiling yet. Not nothing. Maya turned and put her hand over mine, and we stood there with the water running and looked like people in a commercial where they've decided on a mortgage. We didn't look at the clock. We didn't talk about winning because I don't think there was a game. At the start of November, the town put temporary fencing around the whole lower half of Ridge Hill. There had been a slide, the paper said. A minor settling, nothing to be alarmed about. The pictures showed a place where the grass had slumped like a tired person into a seat and left a long groove. You could see in the center of the groove a rectangle of stone not much bigger than a bread box, the top of a tomb that had been lower than the ground until the ground decided to take a breath. The comments under the article argued about whether it was disrespectful to show it. Someone posted a link to a GoFundMe for a proper survey and stabilization of the site. Mrs. Kearney donated $20 and wrote, "For all of you, them," which is a sentence that can make you cry if you let it. The night after the slide, I put the headphones on again because pretending not to wasn't helping. I skipped to the last half hour and sat still and told myself to let something be what it is. The names came. The creak never changed. The stone sound came not often. And every time it did, I felt a muscle in my throat pull tight. At the very end, a voice I hadn't heard before said, like a teacher who cares if you're paying attention, "Here." Another said, "Here." Another. Then my name. It said it patiently, like it knew it had all the time in the world. I waited to hear if it would say a date. It didn't. It said, "Stay." I turned it off and listened to the actual world. A car passed. Somewhere a dog barked like it had been told to pretend it a dog. In the radiator, steam worked its way through a seam and made a noise like someone trying not to laugh. I lay down on the rug and pressed my ear to the floor, and the building said the things buildings say. I heard scattered and at a distance the idea of names, like a roll call happening in a room I wasn't allowed in. I wish I could say I went back up there with a shovel and a lantern, and some magnificent intention to put bones back with their stones. That's the kind of story where the hero gets hurt in a picturesque way, and the town elects them to the historical society and they start a foundation. I didn't go back. I never went back. The recorder went into a drawer. I only took it out to ask a professor if I could defer the rest of the semester and work something out in the spring. He said, "Take care of yourself," and sounded like a person who has rehearsed that sentence. I got on a bus that smelled like old raincoats and slept in bursts that felt like falling, and woke to the hum of the heater and the whisper that lives inside long drives. A boy in the row ahead played a game on his phone, and the sound effects had a wash of noise under them. And in that wash I heard my first name and then my middle. The bus made a right turn. The whispers slid off the windows and pooled on the floor. Now I live in a different state, and my bedroom faces a different set of trees, and the appliances here have their own complicated relationship to time. When the refrigerator kicks on, there's a breath in it that is nearly a word, but not quite. When it rains, all that white sound tries to be one thing and fails, and in that failure are the traces of what my brain wants to hear. I've stopped arguing with it. I've stopped telling myself that the voices can't cross state lines, or that the creek's gossip can't get into a building with different pipes. I think the truth is less dramatic and worse. Once you learn how to hear names hiding in noise, you can't go back to hearing just noise. The world is a recording that never stops, and there's always somebody willing to say here for you when you falter. You want a last thing, something wrapped up. Here's what I have. 2 weeks ago, a package came with no return address. Inside was a plastic bag with the end broken off like somebody tore it open with impatience. There was dust on the bottom of the box, the fine pale kind. There was a note with no name that said in that squarish block print I recognized now that I let myself, "Keep what's yours." It smelled faintly of damp leaves. I threw the bag out and stood at the sink and let the water run and listened to the noise it made. It took a long time to hear anything besides the hiss. When the word came, it was a mistake the water made, and also it was not. It said my full name as if reading it from an old ledger. It said here, and I said here back before I could stop myself. I think that's the worst part. Not the voices, not the dates, not the feeling that the hill has a ledger and the creek is its clerk and the town sleepwalks around a list it can't change. The worst part is how easy it is to answer, how your mouth knows how to form the sound, how your breath wants to say yes, even when you never went back, even when you move, even when you tell yourself that you're done. Every roll call expects to be answered. Every stone expects to be named. If you've ever heard your name in the hush between things, you know what I mean. You'll be making tea or riding a bus or lying awake at 4 a.m., and the world will pull your name like a thread out of the fabric of its own noise. You will answer. You won't be able to help it, and somewhere a place you thought you left will mark the line next to you with a neat little check. I'm not from there. That matters, because the people who are from there have a way of making you feel like you're walking in on a conversation that started 100 years ago. I was just looking for a quiet summer job, something outdoors that didn't involve a computer and fluorescent lights. A friend in Montreal mentioned a vacancy for a seasonal caretaker in a small cemetery near the St. Lawrence, a village most folks drive past on the way to somewhere else. Cut the grass, trim the hedges, sweep the gravel walkways, keep the tools locked up. It sounded peaceful, even a little honorable. The woman who hired me over the phone, Yvette, spoke in a soft rush of French and English and told me I could stay in a tiny apartment over the funeral home's garage. The pay wasn't good, but the rent was almost nothing. I said yes without thinking. The first day I got there, the air was already thick, the kind of July heat that turns the sky the color of boiled milk. The cemetery sat behind the church like a thought someone didn't want to say out loud. The stones were old and dark, names half-eaten by lichen, dates stubborn and small. A low stone wall ran around the whole place. Beyond it there were hayfields, a line of birch trees, and further out the glitter of the river. When the wind came up, it smelled like sweet grass and water. Yvette met me in front of the chapel and handed me a ring of keys. She wore a black dress even in the heat, like she'd forgotten how to fold it away for summer. Her hair was pinned back and glasses hung on a chain. She had that undertaker calm, the quiet that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. "You'll be fine," she said. "It's simple work. Mornings are best before the sun is strong. If you need anything, my nephew Theodore can help. He's around." She looked past me at the rows of stones. "We keep it neat here. People like to see neat, I promised I would." Before she left, she said something in French I didn't understand fully. I caught the words gelée and juillet, frost in July. I must have looked confused. She offered the thin apology of a shrug, like she'd said it without meaning to, and then she drove off toward the village with her indicator clicking for 3 blocks because that's the kind of place it was. I set up in the apartment over the garage. It was one room with a sloped ceiling and a little kitchenette. The window looked down on the driveway where the funeral cars were parked, deep black and polished. When I opened the fridge, the cold light washed my face and I realized how hot the room was. It would take a few nights to get used to sleeping under a roof that baked all day. The cemetery tools were in a shed at the far corner of the grounds. A push mower, a string trimmer, clippers, rakes, a couple of shovels that were older than me. There was a beat-up blue thermos stuck behind a coil of garden hose. Someone had scratched a name into it, Marcel. When I noticed it later, I didn't think anything of it. People leave stuff all the time at jobs that get handed around. The first week went the way quiet weeks go. I cut the grass in strict rows and practiced turning the mower at the edge of the headstones without banging them. I rinsed dust from the granite with the hose and wiped the dates with a rag. It surprised me how quickly I started talking to the dead. You say little things to fill the air, the same way you talk to a cat when you pass it in a hallway. "Good morning," I would say to no one, or "sorry about the spray," if the hose ran a bit wild. It sounds strange now, but it felt normal then. You spend hours in a place like that, the silence needs a shape. There were regulars too. 2 women in their 70s who came every Monday to sit on a bench under the birches and smoke long, skinny cigarettes. A man who walked the perimeter with a paper bag in hand and placed a beer at his brother's stone, then stood a few paces away and drank his own. A young mother with a stroller who cut through the cemetery to avoid the main road and said hi every time, her kid blinking up at the leaves like they had answers. The priest, Father Luke, waved to me the way people do when they see you often but haven't learned your name. His collar always looked too tight. Theo, the nephew Yvette mentioned, was 16 and had the restlessness of dogs at a sliding door. He'd wheel the trimmer around like a soldier with a rifle, talk too fast, and then get quiet at the worst times, like mid-sentence. His English and my school French met in the middle somewhere and made a mess that still worked. On the Friday of my second week, I woke before dawn from a cold dream and couldn't get warm. I put it down to the way heat sometimes flips around and fools you. The window had fogged, which was odd. I wiped a circle and looked out. The lawn lights made little pools, the kind of yellow that feels tired. The sky was the gray-blue of early morning, clean and mild. No clouds, no reason to be cold. I went down to the yard anyway. When I rounded the corner of the garage, I saw the frost. It lay on the grass like a veil, thin and glittering, a white sheen that didn't belong to July. It wasn't over everything, just a wide path that curved through the cemetery like a careful brushstroke. It started at the gate, crossed a double row of stones, and then narrowed into a strip the width of a coffin until it stopped at a family plot near the birches. I stood with my hands on the stone wall and stared. I could see my breath. Not much, but there. I told myself it was something stupid. Shade from the night, a low fog that had frozen for an hour in that one spot. I told myself a lot of things. Then I stepped over the wall and the cold ate the heat from my socks in one swallow. I swear I heard the little squeak glitter makes on glass. The frost had grain to it, fine lines like ferns. The closer I got, the more I saw how it feathered into the warm grass. At the edge where it stopped, there was a perfect line where the blades went from stiff white to dark green, like someone had drawn it with a ruler. I followed the path to the family plot. 4 stones, worn and low, with a 5th newer one in the middle. The old ones were for the grandparents and a great-aunt. The dates reached back into the 1920s. The new one was small. The name was Camille, and the dates were 2 winters ago. The little oval photo was the type that would shatter if you breathed wrong. The child's face was squinting into the kind of sunlight you only get at a lake. She wore a red sweater with a deer on it. The frost thickened at her stone. It was rime-crusted and white. The grass in front of it was lower than the rest. The earth had sunk into a shallow dish, the way it does when the ground settles after a burial. Only this was deeper than the others, like someone had pressed a bowl into soft clay and then lifted it away. I crouched to touch the frost. My fingers tingled and I pulled them back. The cold felt like it wanted to climb me, like it was thirsty for skin. When I stood, I stepped on the edge of the hollow and the ground gave a little. Not the way a mole tunnel collapses under your heel. This was a damp, sucking give, like the earth had been loosened from beneath and then tamped back in a hurry. I didn't like the feeling it left in my legs. By the time the sun cleared the birches, the frost had gone. The line it had drawn remained, a dark track of damp grass. Yvette arrived as I was still staring at the child's stone. She came up behind me on quiet shoes and said my name like a question. "Did you see it?" I asked. She didn't smile. She looked at the grass, then at the stone, then at my hands. "I told you," she said. "La gelée de juillet. That's a thing. That's what you were trying to say?" She folded her hands. "It happens some years. Not every year. Not to every grave. We try not to talk about it." She paused. "The last caretaker before you, he wouldn't come in the morning anymore. Only afternoons. And then he didn't want the job." She touched the little oval of the child's photo with her finger like it might burn her. "We keep it neat," she said again, but her voice had nothing behind it. We didn't mention it to anyone else. That afternoon, I trimmed around the stones and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. The way you can sometimes erase a bad moment if you only retell it enough times. But by evening, a weird chill had crept into the little apartment. I stood barefoot in front of the open fridge, letting the cold air pour out. But the feeling in the room was different. The fridge cold was a thing you could step away from. This cold stayed on your skin like talc. I slept with my socks on and a towel stuffed at the bottom of the door. 2 days later, something small shifted on me. I was sweeping gravel off the walkway when the bristles made a sound like glass under sand. I stopped and saw tiny crystals clinging to the stones where the frost had been. They looked like the sugar they sprinkle on those cheap store cupcakes. I bent closer and that thirsty cold breathed across my mouth. I tasted iron or pennies, except cleaner. I started asking around without asking around. In the village store, I stood too long at the counter with a jar of pickles and said, "Weird weather, huh?" The owner, a man who had never once smiled, didn't look up from his lottery machine. "Always is," he said. When I said frost the way you don't say a word you don't mean, he flicked his eyes at me and then at the cooler where the beer stood in rows. "It's July," he said. "You need the other kind of cold?" The priest told me nothing, which was a way of telling me something. When I asked him if he knew the family with the child stone, he nodded and stared over my shoulder at the hills. "We know them," he said. "They moved last year." His voice put a fence around the subject. Theo admitted to seeing the Frost once when he was little on the walk to the bus stop. He laughed that teenage laugh that says he's not scared of anything, but then he said he wouldn't come help me before noon anymore, and did I mind if he trimmed the roadside instead. The old women on the bench under the birches switched to English just to say they had weddings to attend that month and couldn't sit so much. Sorry. That week I watched my breath once more in the morning, but the Frost didn't come. I told myself it had been a one-off, some freak mix of humidity and wind coming off the river. It would be a story I told to someone else someday, and we would shake our heads at how weird weather gets now. Then a stray dog started barking and wouldn't stop. It howled with its nose pointed at the little stone, and its eyes squeezed shut like it was trying to block something out. It wouldn't step onto the family plot. It pawed at the edge of the sinking earth and then yelped like it had been nipped. When it finally ran off, it held one paw in the air as it went. That night I dreamed of walking in waist-deep water and feeling weeds wrap my ankles. When I woke, I was sure my socks would be wet. They were dry, but the towel at the bottom of the door had frozen into a stiff roll. The threads rhymed with tiny needles. I stared at it for a long time before I touched it. When I did, my fingertips stuck for a second like when you lick a railing in winter. I swore and jumped back, and my heart clattered so hard it made a sound in my ears. I went down to Yvette's office and told her I was done. I would work out the week, but that was it. She listened without interrupting, the way she probably listened to people in worse moments. When I finished, she asked if the Frost had reached the apartment. I nodded. She shut her eyes for a second like she was counting to 3. "Okay," she said. "I'll call someone." "Who?" "Marcel," she said, and tilted her chin at the shed. "It was his thermos you saw. He was the caretaker before you. He left, but he didn't go far." She dialed him and spoke rapidly in French, moving her hand like she could push the conversation along the wire. When she hung up, she said he would come at dawn the next day. "If it's going to happen again," she said, "it will be tomorrow." "It's the 20th. That was the date." She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay on my back and watched the shadow of the fan move around the room. The apartment hummed soft, like there was a machine in the walls I'd never noticed before. At 3, I decided to make coffee. The water from the tap ran so cold it made the metal sing. I stood with the mug pressed under my chin and waited for dawn. Marcel arrived at first light in a brown truck that had no business being on the road. He was short and square and wore old army boots. When he stepped out of the truck, I saw the way he walked. Not a limp exactly, more a carefulness. He shook my hand with fingers that were nicked white from old cuts. He looked like someone who had been told the truth and decided not to share it. "You go back to the apartment," he said in a half growl. "You don't come out. If you hear anything, you don't come out." "What am I supposed to hear?" He stared at the birches. "It's better if you don't hear it." I tried to argue. He ignored that and walked to the shed. He took nothing but the shovel with the worn wood handle. He leaned it against his shoulder and went into the cemetery alone, moving like he was trying to sneak up on an animal that wasn't going to run. I watched him go to the family plot. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, the shovel against his leg, and then he took a step back and made a small sign in the air with his thumb that wasn't a cross and wasn't not one either. The frost came like a breath you see before you feel it. One moment the grass was normal. The next, a lace of white stitched itself from the gate to where Marcel stood. It traveled in a quiet wave, not fast, not slow, and the sound it made was paper creasing in a quiet room. I saw the steam of his exhale when the cold reached him. He looked at the shovel and then at the little stone. When he stepped forward onto the frost, his boots squealed. He had taken only 3 steps when his right foot stuck. He tried to drag it back and couldn't. He put the shovel under the heel to pry it up, and the metal scraped a bright, hateful sound. He swore, or maybe he prayed. He hacked the edge of his boot free, and when it came away, he left a triangle of rubber in the frost like a black tongue. He took another step and his left foot went in. Not stuck this time, sunk. The ground gave the way it had under mine, but more. The frost glazed over the sole of his boot, up to the laces, and then the dirt around it slumped down. He gripped the shovel in both hands and jammed it into the earth outside the white line and leaned his weight on it. The wood creaked. I was halfway to the door, ready to go out and help, when he looked up and saw me and shook his head once in a way that pinned me to the floor. "Stay," he mouthed. He set his jaw. He didn't move for a count of 30, then 40. Then I lost track because the cold started to ring in the glass of my window. It made a high note like a tuning fork you can't stop hearing. Marcel stared down at the child's stone and said something through his teeth. I couldn't hear the words. The frost crept up his boot another inch. He took the shovel and brought it down into the hollow with a fast, ugly chop, like he was cutting through ice to reach fishing water. The blade struck with a dull note. He hit again. The sound changed. I don't know how to explain that except to say the ground made a sound that was not ground. Imagine a chest freezer left open. Imagine that sound turning inside out. He swung the shovel a third time and something beneath the dirt gave and hissed in a long exhale that fogged around his knees. He gagged and turned his face away. He said no, but like a person might say it to a feeling, not to a person. He dug again, not deep, only enough to break the crust. Then he shoved the shovel under his boot and levered. Hard. This time the earth let go, and he stumbled backward onto warm grass like he'd crossed a state line. He should have left. He didn't. He set the shovel aside and knelt at the edge of the hollow. He took off his hat. He laid his fingers on the lip of the stone and leaned close like he was trying to hear whispers from a room that shouldn't have people in it. The frost stopped where it was. It didn't spread. It didn't retreat. It lay there like a held breath. After a minute, he stood again slowly, careful not to slide back into the white. He looked back up at my window. His face was the face of a man who has seen something he doesn't get to unsee. He made another small sign with his hand, the same knot cross, and then he picked up the shovel and walked the long way around, avoiding the frost line as if it were a border patrol. He came to the garage and set the shovel down like it was full of electricity. He didn't look at me when I opened the door. He went to the sink in the garage and ran the water and stuck his boots under it to melt whatever clung. He took a long time doing that, even after the faucet steamed. "What did you hear?" I said finally. He shook his head. "You don't want it? Tell me anyway." He shut off the water. He dried his hands slowly with a shop rag that had seen better years. He told me the frost had come before, that he'd seen it a few times. The first time was the winter the river didn't freeze until January, and the ground stayed soft when it should have gone hard. The last time was 2 summers ago when the child was buried. He had been the one to tamp the soil. He said it the way a person admits something they're not ashamed of but still don't love. "It comes on dates," he said. "Not always the birthday. Sometimes the day he didn't finish. Sometimes the day they were meant to be somewhere else and didn't get there." "Is it always children?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "No," he said. "But it's worse when it is. What do you do about it?" He gave me a look like I had asked him how to unplug a thunderstorm. "You stand your ground," he said. "You don't dig. You don't put salt. You don't pray in the wrong way." He paused, the rag balled in his fist. "You wait and it leaves. But if you give it a step, it'll take your foot. That's what it wants. Only a piece. Enough to prove it was here. Did it take yours?" I said before I could stop myself. He didn't answer. He set the rag down, took off his boot and pulled off his sock. His toes were gone from the middle out, a neat little space where warmth should have been. The skin was smooth and shiny, as if the body had learned to be done with what was missing and made plans around it. He had 10 years of walking in that careful way in his ankles. "Don't go out there again," he said. "Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. Let it forget you." "What about you?" I asked. He shrugged. "It doesn't forget me." He left by the road, his boots wet, his truck coughing smoke. Yvette watched him go from her office window, and then came to lean in the doorway of the garage with her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding something in place. "He's not a superstitious man," she said. "He's the one you call when the river takes a snowmobile and you have to bring it back. He's the one who stays when the family cannot." We stood like that until the sun climbed high enough to make the asphalt smell like oil. The frost had melted by then, leaving only a darker stripe of grass, but the cold of it hung in the garage like the echo of a bell you can't find. I worked through the afternoon, long rows with the mower, the motor noise steady enough to push my head clear. I didn't go near the family plot. I didn't look. At dusk, I locked the shed and climbed the stairs to the apartment. The towel was still stiff. I kicked it aside and shut the door hard enough to make the window rattle. I thought about calling someone, but who would I call? I turned up the little fan and lay on the bed, and for a while the tiredness of fieldwork did what it always does. It dragged me under. I woke just before midnight to a sound that took a second to place. It was the radio downstairs in the garage, the AM set that Yvette used sometimes to hear weather. I could hear the thin static through the floor and the faint murmur of a voice. I lay there and counted to 10, then 20. The voice didn't resolve into words. It was like hearing a conversation through a wall, the shape of human sound without the meaning. I got up and stood at the top of the stairs and told myself to go back to bed. The radio hissed a little louder and the voice sharpened. A child's voice or a woman trying to make her voice small. I couldn't understand the language. It might have been French. It might have been something else. My hand found the railing. I went down one step, then another. The wood creaked the way it always did. The radio swelled and dipped, the kind of sound you get when you're driving a long, empty road and the station winks in and out. I hit the switch at the bottom and the garage light came on, bright and flat. The radio sat on the tool bench, the red needle pointing to a frequency with no station. The voice stopped when I stepped onto the concrete. I stood there and felt ridiculous and relieved all at once. I reached for the dial to turn it off. Cold caught my wrist. Not a hand, nothing like that. Just a band of air so sharp it made the hair on my arm go flat. The towel at the door had not moved. The crack under the door was a thin, dark line. I turned the radio off. The silence clicked in, then something small tapped on the other side of the door. Not a knock, not animal claws. It sounded like the tip of a nail being dragged across smooth paint. Once lightly, then again higher up, at the level of a child's hand. I didn't move. I listened. The tapping traced a line the width of the doorframe, slow and steady. The cold lapped at my ankles up to the laces of my shoes. I thought of Marcel's careful way of standing over that white border. I thought stupidly about the little deer on the sweater. When the tapping reached the latch, it stopped. The silence swelled until I could hear the sound my tongue made lifting off the roof of my mouth. I forced myself to breathe normally. The garage smelled like oil and soap and something clean the cold carries with it. That impersonal hospital smell of metal and air. I backed away from the door and up the stairs with my steps landing in the same places they did every night. When I got to the top, I shut the apartment door and pushed the dresser in front of it, then laughed at myself for that because a dresser wouldn't stop air. I sat on the bed and waited for the sound to start again. It didn't, the radio stayed dead. I waited until I saw the light change in the window and the birds started up in the birches, the little ones that sound like someone turning a rusty crank. Then I moved the dresser back and opened the door. The towel wasn't stiff anymore. It was wet. The crack under the door was damp enough to darken the wood, and when my bare foot landed in it, the shock went up into my bones. On the inside of the door, right where a child might reach, a streak of frost had dried into a thin white film. At the height of my knee, there was a small print. Not a handprint, not anything you could show someone, just an oval of clearer wood where the frost hadn't stuck, a shape no bigger than the top of a jar lid. I didn't pack. I didn't make coffee. I didn't sweep the gravel off the walkways. I left the keys on the hook in the garage and went to Yvette's office and told her I was sorry. She put her hand to her throat like she'd forgotten there was a chain there, and then nodded without asking questions. Maybe there was nothing left to ask. She said I could go. She said she would have Theo cover until she found someone else. She didn't say be careful. She didn't need to. Marcel saw me as I was loading my bag into my car. He was parked under the birches like he'd been waiting there all night. He raised a hand, not quite a wave. I went to him without meaning to. He looked at my eyes, not at my mouth. You going? He said. Yes. Good. He lifted his chin toward the cemetery. Don't take the river road. I was going to. Don't, he said. His face had a weight I trusted. Take the upper route by the fields. And when you come to the White House with the blue door, you don't look left. Why? You don't look left, he said, and put his hand on my shoulder like we were family. Drive in the sun if you can. I did what he said. I took the upper road and kept my eyes on the line between the asphalt and the gravel. When that blue door flashed at the corner of my vision, my neck fought me like a horse that didn't want the bit. I tightened my hands on the wheel and stared ahead and told myself out loud that I was almost gone. It's been months. Back in the city, the heat broke and came back like a debt. I was fine for a while. Then I woke one night to a familiar flat cold hovering at the level of my ankles. I live on the 3rd floor. The building doesn't have a basement. The sill had a blush of frost across it when I turned on the lamp. a little fan of white like breath dried on glass. I rubbed it with the heel of my hand until it came away in a paste. I told myself the AC had finally decided to work too hard. I told myself a lot of things. Last week I stopped at a cafe to write, the kind with marble tables that always wobble. 2 young women sat next to me, talking around their cigarettes and their coffee and a picture on a phone of a kid at a lake in a red sweater, the kind with a deer on the front. They spoke in a mix of French and English and the kind of slang that makes you smile when you pretend you're not listening. One of them said Camille, like the way you say a name that makes the air different, and the other reached across the table and put her hand on top of the first one's and didn't say anything at all. I haven't been back to the village. I won't go. I keep my shoes by the bed now even on the hottest nights because I learned what happens if you give that cold an inch. Sometimes I wake with my heart already going and my toes aching like old teeth. Some mornings there's a line of wet on the floorboards where the door meets the hall. It dries by noon. I've started keeping a towel there. A habit is a way of not thinking, and I'll take that. If you want to be sure, you can drive out to that village I won't name and walk the cemetery wall and look for the family plot near the birches. You can run your hand over the child's stone. You can look down and see that depressed circle in the grass, the spot where the earth never really comes back up. You can crouch and touch the dirt if you want to feel the truth faster. If you go in July, you might feel it without touching. It's clean cold. Hospital cold, the cold of something that was supposed to stay shut and didn't. The grounds will be neat because they keep it neat. Your shoes will make the right sounds on the gravel. The birches will drop flickers of shade on your shoulders. You can pretend the glitter on the grass is just dew. I don't care what you do. I'm telling you so you know. Frost can happen in July. Not everywhere and not for long, but long enough. It doesn't take much. A step in the wrong spot, a reason for a date to remember itself. A door you left cracked because it's hot and you wanted air. And if you feel it, that clean cold that isn't the weather, don't make the mistake of trying to test it with your skin. Don't press your fingers in like you're curious. Don't stand in the white. Don't dig. Don't pray in the wrong way. Stand back and breathe like you're trying not to scare a wild thing and wait for it to decide it has taken enough. They say no grass grows on that grave. I think that's true, but it's not the part that matters. The part that matters is that sometimes the frost takes a little and sometimes it wants more and sometimes it decides it likes you. If it does, you won't have to go back to the cemetery to find out. It'll remember the shape of your door. It'll remember the sound your shoe made when it squealed free. It will tug at you in the night like a child needing to be let in. Polite at first, then a little more sure. And if you open the door even just to see, it will have all the time it needs. I'm not from there. I moved on. But the cold followed, thin as a whisper, and I know this much. If I wake again and find frost at my feet in July, I will not move. I will not go to the window. I will not touch the door. I will pull the covers to my chest and listen to the sound of air turning to glass and hope, very quietly, that I'm not the date it came for. If I am, I will leave as little of me as I can. Enough for it to remember it was here. Enough for me to keep walking. I was 17 the first time I cut through St. Mary's after midnight. It isn't a shortcut so much as it is a dare. The path dips off the lane behind the Black Bull, past the toppled headstones and the yew trees that lean like old men listening, and it lets you out by the allotments if you don't lose your nerve halfway and turn back. Everyone in our year had done it at least once. You can't really call it bravery when there's only one proper pub in our village, and everyone's used to seeing you stumble home. But it was late, and cold in that Yorkshire way that finds the space between layers, and I didn't fancy another 10 minutes on the pavement past Mr. Fletcher's barking spaniels. So I went through the gate at St. Mary's and told myself it was just stones and names. There was a policeman already there, stood by the gatepost like a carved figurehead. Tall, the old sort of uniform, black greatcoat and a white checkered band on his cap. The lamplight didn't quite reach his face. He didn't say anything, and my first stupid thought was that he'd clocked I was underage and I'd be getting my ma'am dragged out of bed for a telling off. I nodded because that's what you do even when you're a bit wobbly. He raised a gloved hand not to stop me but to point, past me along the path where the ground buckled with the older stones. I don't know why I followed the gesture. I could have kept walking. I could have said, "All right, officer," and gone on. But there was something about the way his arm was held, like the weight of it was hard, like it mattered. And I went where he pointed, down the gravel to a row of headstones that leaned together as if gossiping. My trainers scuffed and a soft rattle came from the hedges, something small waking and going still again. The stone he'd sent me to was ordinary, gray with the black letters sinking into it. The lichen had grown like frost around the edges. There were other stones nearby with angels and doves and carved lilies. This one had none of that. It had a name with my mam's maiden name attached to it, though, and my stomach went tight because that's not a name you see often. It had my birthday carved there too, not the year but the day and month, and under died, the date it gave was the next day. If you've ever had the sensation of waking too fast from a dream, where you know the room you're in but it doesn't know you back, it was like that. I could see my breath. I could hear the hum of the street lamp and distant traffic on the A road. I could smell mud and that damp cold smell old churches carry. I blinked and looked again, and the carved letters didn't waver or shimmer. They were clean, crisp even, as if they'd been cut last week and not in the 19th century like the others nearby. I told myself someone had the same name as me and a birthday that matched, and that the date for tomorrow was a cleaner's prank, an awful joke from one of the groundsmen. I told myself things I didn't believe. I turned back to the gate to ask the policeman who'd put this here, and to say that it wasn't funny, but he'd gone. The path beyond the gate looked too bright, as if the light had been turned up, and the road past it too empty. I stood for a few minutes getting a grip on myself, and then I walked home the long way around, something I should have done in the first place. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to Mom snore and the radiator clicking like a watch left on a table, and my phone glaring up with useless things. People were on Snap sending pictures of pints and foamy lattes and their dogs asleep in laundry. Paige messaged the group chat, "Who's on the early bus?" I was meant to be. I tapped out that I'd be walking. My hands were shaking so much I had to delete half of what I wrote, my thumbs going wild, and I kept seeing that clean line where my name would be. At 6, I got up, made tea too strong, and told Mom my stomach was bad. She was brushing her hair in the hall mirror and paused to look past her own reflection at me. There are years of a person you forget until shock lays them out again. I was 5 in that look, and 9 and 12, and lying about having done my homework. "All right," she said eventually, and her voice softened. "You'll give it a miss. Drink water and lie down. I'll ring school in a bit." I lay back down with the curtain open and watched the terrace roofs change color. The sky went white as milk. The old quarry beyond the allotments showed a slice of its pale cheek. I nearly convinced myself I was stupid, that I'd been shown something old and made it about me, because that's the selfishness of 17-year-olds. I fell asleep about 9, and at 10:30 the sirens started, one then another, too many to be just someone fallen on a pavement. By noon, my phone was a mess. Names piled up at the top of the screen with the same sentence in different guises. Bus crash. At the junction past the petrol station. A lorry had lost its load. The driver of our school bus had swerved, but the bus had clipped the tail of the lorry and gone sideways into the barrier. Everyone in my row of seats was dead, and the thing I remember most about reading that sentence from Lewis was seeing the little battery symbol in the top right. Like that mattered more. I didn't tell my mother that night. She knew about the crash, we all did. The village is small, and the world gets even smaller when something goes wrong. But I didn't tell her about the policeman in the churchyard or the stone or my name on it. I hardly told myself. That night when I shut the light off, I lay in a thicket of my duvet and the sound of my own breath and thought of the boy from the year below. Dean, who had once borrowed my revision notes and never given them back, who had sat 2 along from me on the bus that week. I imagined his mum putting her hands to the side of her head and saying nothing because the sound had gone out of her. I thought of the bus driver, Mr. Sutcliffe, who never minded if you were a bit late and ran up with your coat half on. The names had teeth now. For 2 nights I didn't go near St. Mary's. I took the long way to the shop. I crossed to the far pavement going past the lane. But grief doesn't let you choose what you think about. It chooses you. And on the 3rd night I found myself at the gate again, telling myself I'd dreamed it that first time, that maybe I'd mixed up the row. The path crunched under my shoes. A fox moved along the wall and leapt, a trick of rust gone. The headstone row waited like an unfriendly audience. The stone that had the accident of my name was only a stone now. The lichen was the poor yellow of old sponge. The letters didn't stand out. The dates were impossible. I could have put it down right there. You know how you avoid believing in things that change your life? I could have done that. But as I turned toward the gate, he was there again. The policeman, still in that old-fashioned uniform, the checkered band dull in the weak light. I had the sudden dumb thought that he was cold, which is ridiculous. He didn't come toward me. He lifted his hand again, slower this time. He pointed to the left, not to the row I'd just been at, but deeper into the older graves where the ground pinches together and the grass grows thin, and the yew roots buckle up the soil. There was another stone waiting. You start to feel like the world is arranged in vignettes when you're being led like that. A figure here, a pointing hand there, a stone waiting like an appointment. This one had a family name I knew, not mine, but the girl who lived 2 streets over, who'd been in our class in primary and had changed schools in year 8, had that surname, and there was a first name on the stone that could have been hers if you squinted, if you forgave the way villagers spell things a dozen ways across the centuries. The date under died was Saturday, 2 days from then. "Who are you?" I said out loud. The man didn't answer. The voice I had made wasn't one I'd used before. It sounds like an older man's voice when you call out like that in the dark, stupid, and trying to be brave. I went toward him a step, and solid ground didn't feel like ground at all. "What am I meant to do?" I said. He didn't lower his hand. He held the point steady like a signpost. The girl's name was Paige. I messaged her that night without thinking how mad it would sound. I told her I'd had a bad feeling about the weekend and maybe she should stay close to home. She sent laughing emojis and then a question mark and then nothing. In the morning, she replied with a screenshot of train times and a picture of a birthday card spread on a duvet. Her cousin in Kegley was turning 21 and she was going over Saturday afternoon. I replied, "Don't take the late train. Don't go near the crossing at Silsden. I saw your name." I hovered over send. I put the phone face down and picked it up again and sent it. She didn't answer. Too much of the world is designed to let you doubt yourself and then hate yourself for not insisting. Saturday came like all summer Saturdays do, making the memory of last week's rain louder by contrast. People were at their doors, hosing bits of pavement, washing cars, shouting across hedges. Dad was between shifts at the garage. He had the radio on in the kitchen and was singing terribly. I could smell bacon that had gone a bit too far and the tang of bleach in the sink. I kept checking my phone until it felt like it had weight. At 3, Paige posted a photo from the train window, the blur of fields. At 4, I was sitting on the step outside because the house air felt bad, watching a cloud that looked like a collie dog changed its shape until it didn't. At 5:30, the sirens went again, but fewer this time. A car had been clipped by a delivery van at the bend at the end of our road. People went out and stood the way people stand when something is both near and not quite theirs. I stood with them because it felt like that was what the afternoon wanted. My phone stayed quiet. At 7, a news alert came up nowhere near public enough to be a proper article. Young woman in hospital after slip at Keighley Station footbridge. It wasn't Paige. It was some other young woman with a different surname. Something in me loosened in a way I'm not proud of. At 8, Paige sent me a voice note of her cousin blowing out candles. "Happy now?" she said a minute later, and a winking face. I typed yes. I typed, "You're fine then." I typed sorry. I deleted all 3. I typed, "Be careful coming home." I sent that one. She came home. She posted a photo from the bus on Sunday afternoon, and then a photo of her cat lying like a shaped cushion on a chair. But when I went down to St. Mary's that night, the man was there and he pointed anyway. Sometimes belief isn't a switch, it's a leaking tap. You can ignore it until you can't. I tried to be rational. I tried to tell myself that the dates and names were coincidences, and that my brain was a pattern machine, and that the policeman was a trick of a mind that wanted to make order out of mourning. But he kept appearing. Not every night. Some evenings the gate showed only the gate, and the path showed only the path, and the stones were stones. But then you'd see the gleam off the cap in the corner of your eye, and your stomach would get a coat of frost, and you'd know before you knew. I told one person, Lewis. He was my best mate. He'd been the one to message me about the bus. We met at the wreck where the swings creak if you push off too high. I didn't tell him right away. We kicked a ball around, lanky and clumsy in that last awkward summer before everything becomes hard. And then when he was sitting on the back of the bench and I was on the swing, I told him the whole thing in a rush. He went quiet in that way people do when they're trying not to hurt you with the wrong sort of noise. "Mate," he said eventually, slow. "You think a ghost copper is doing forecast work on gravestones?" I don't know what I think, I said. I think something pointed me to my name and I didn't die. He scratched his neck. He'd nicked himself shaving that morning and there was a little line there. You're Rao, he said, and he swallowed. He'd moved seats last term. Different form group. He would have been across the aisle. Don't you ever feel like the day's air is wrong before something goes wrong? I said. Like you're breathing something that's stale but you can't open a window. He didn't answer that. You want me to come see then? He said instead. You want me to come stare at stones with you at midnight like a pair of idiots? I want you to come so I know I'm not mad, I said. We went on Thursday because that was when his mum was at her ceramics class and he could say he was at mine and nobody would ring anyone. It had rained during the day and the world felt washed and clean and the smells stood out. The sharp of nettles, wet moss from the stones, a cigarette stubbed under the gate, the distant metallic taste the buses leave. The gate hinge squealed because of course it did. We stood in the path's first dark and didn't speak for a bit. When he appeared, it wasn't with any ceremony. One moment there was only the U, and the next there was a tall black shape in the tidy line of the cap's band. He was maybe 20 feet away beyond the gate, not blocking it, just as if he'd been there before we were and would be there after. Lewis let out a breath I suspect he didn't know he'd held. You see him? I said. I see a bloke, he said. He spoke louder than the place wanted and the sound banged against the stones. I can't see his face, he added quieter.
Is that meant to be a thing?
The man lifted his hand and pointed. I hated how grateful I felt that he'd do the same trick with someone else there. It meant I wasn't inventing it, but it also meant the world was bigger than I'd let it be. We followed the line of his arm and came to a headstone that sat at the angle of two paths. The name wasn't ours or ours adjacent. It was old-fashioned, the sort your granddad would have or his granddad. The died date was that day. Is that? Lewis stopped and breathed in. The air made a sound in his nose. What am I meant to do with that? We can't go knock on all the doors asking who has this name. That could be half of Bloody Leeds. We could go see Reverend Holt, I said. Ask about some old copper. See if there's a story. We went the next day during lunch. Reverend Holt was in his office at the back of the church, drinking tea out of a mug that had a sheep on it. He was younger than vicars are meant to be and wore trainers. He listened the way you listen to a dreamed talk. You nod and say, and you keep your face open. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell us to leave it alone. He said there were stories about a constable who'd been killed in the 1970s when football got messy in town, and he'd walked a lad home and been hit by a bottle thrown from a passing car. He said that sort of story gathers moss differently depending on who's telling it. He said it could be a piece of collective memory trying to help itself. Are we in danger? I asked, and I heard how I said we and not I. I think grief makes you expect patterns, he said. That doesn't mean there aren't any. But it does mean that if you stare at wallpaper long enough, you'll see faces. Sometimes you're meant to see them. So what do we do if we see him? Lewis said. You could light a candle, Holt said, as if that were a very normal answer to give two students with untucked shirts and muddy trainers. We lit a candle that afternoon. I didn't feel better. I felt like I'd done something the day asked me to. That evening, Mum made a casserole and Dad asked if I'd thought about the apprenticeship at the garage he could line up. And I said maybe and put something in my mouth so I wouldn't have to add anything. He watches me carefully when he thinks I don't see. He thinks I've gone quiet because of the crash. And he's not wrong, but he's also missing it by an inch. And that inch is the world. The names on the stones kept coming. Not every night. Not always someone I knew. Sometimes it was a surname I could attach to a lad who lived at the end of the lane. Sometimes it was a name that tasted like the library and the railway and old men playing cribbage and could have been nobody left alive. Once it was a baby's name and the date was that morning. And I left the churchyard and walked until my calves ached and my throat hurt from not making a sound. A week later it was Dad's name. Not his first name, but his surname exactly. And the first name, its older version, the one he corrects chemists and call centers on. Underdied it said Wednesday, the day after tomorrow. The air that night was wet in a way that sticks. The yew trees were slick with it. The stone with my father's near name had a crack running into it like a suggestion of a river. I touched it and my fingers came back dark. The man by the gate didn't move except for the slow lowering of his arm like a signal finished. I tried to ring Dad 3 times before I left the churchyard, but there was no signal. The hill there is wrong for phones. You have to walk out to the lane. I walked fast enough to trip twice, sending a stone folder to my knee and not feeling it until later. When the bars came back, I rang again and he picked up breathless. "What's up?" he said. There were voices behind him, someone laughing. He was at the garage late doing a favor job. "Don't drive Wednesday," I said. "Don't get in the van. Don't go past the mill road." "Are you all right?" he said. His voice changed in that half-step men use when they go from teasing to checking. "What's brought this on?" Listen to me. I didn't have the words for the whole thing, and even if I did, I couldn't put it into the phone, into the air, to be caught by signal by the town. "Say you won't drive, please. I'll go with you if you have to go anywhere. We'll walk it." He was quiet for a beat. "You've had a fright," he said, not unkindly. "You can come into work with me if you like. I'll clear it with Pete, but I have to go out Wednesday morning for parts." "I can't not." "Don't," I said again. The way a child says don't at a stairwell, an open oven because they can see the future for one shivering moment. He laughed then in the gentlest way. "Tell you what," he said. "I'll take the long way. I'll avoid the mill road. Come in with me. We'll have bacon buddies and a brew, and you can sit in the office and watch that daft dog on YouTube fall off the sofa you keep watching on loop." Wednesday morning, I went with him. I sat in the office with its glass wall looking out onto the concrete and watched the belly of the day rise up. We had our tea. I watched every clock, not just the one. At 10, he said he'd go get the parts. I said I'd come. He said all right, but to make it quick. Pete can't do the clutch on his own. The van smelled like oil and old receipts. We took the long way without passing the mill road. We passed the river instead, fast and low under the bridge, not looking up at us. My hands had sweated into my jeans. We turned by the industrial estate and went round the back to the supplier, and Dad went in, and I sat in the van and breathed for what felt like the first time since the stone. And nothing happened. The day sat. We drove back. He turned left instead of right because the bin lorry was blocking, and we came past St. Mary's where the wall is low enough to see over, and at the bend by the allotments a cyclist took the corner too tight and fell, and Dad hit the brake like slamming a book closed, and the van stopped a yard from the man. And the cyclist sat up with blood on his knee and said sheepish, "Sorry, mate." And Dad let out a sound that was part laugh and part sob. He didn't die. My father didn't die. He went to work the next day and the day after, making jokes about me and my new passion for walking. But I couldn't say I'd saved him, because saved implies I knew what was going to happen and stopped it, and what I had done was ask and watch and wait, and still the man in the churchyard appeared and lifted his arm and pointed. "You think there's a way to be good at this, to get better by repetition. You think you'll learn to see which names matter, which dates are negotiable and which are stitched. You think you'll become the kind of person who knows what to say to a stranger with the same name as the stone's name, who will knock on a door and convince without scaring." I wrote lists of names I could attach to names. I went through the old electoral register online until my eyes hurt. I messaged people I'd not spoken to in years and lied about having a dream. Sometimes they humored me. Sometimes they blocked me. Twice I watched an ambulance take away the person I'd warned anyway. And once, just once, I watched a woman step off the curb, look down because her bag strap had slipped, and step back because a bus came too quick and the date carved did not come true. Or maybe it did in some way I can't see, because what counts is dying anyway. Do you die when a bus catches your bag and purls you backwards so you scrape your elbow and spend the evening telling the story differently? Do you die in a version of the day that didn't happen, because a pointing hand asked someone else to look? In September, school started again and everything was in that muted color it wears then. People wore their losses quietly or loudly. There was a memorial for the bus in the assembly hall with the bad acoustics. Reverend Holt spoke, and the headmistress cried carefully, and a boy from year 10 who always looked like he'd outgrow us all read a poem and turned red with doing it. I sat with my hands flat on my knees and tried not to look at the windows where the trees outside blurred in the rain. I didn't go to St. Mary's for a week and a half because I thought, if I stop going, maybe he'll stop pointing. And if he stops pointing, maybe what he points to will not be looked at and will therefore not be real. And then on Friday I walked past and my hands were in my pockets and the gate was open a little, and I felt, stupidly, like it was rude to pass by a door you've been through so many times without at least glancing in. He was there. I didn't have to step in. He was on the path beyond the gate, where the gravel is newer and the puddle always sits by the first bend. He lifted his hand and pointed, and I was tired in a way that made my bones feel like teaspoons in a drawer. "No," I said aloud and my voice cracked. "No, not tonight." His arm didn't waver. He doesn't insist. You can always walk away. It's a trick of this that the choice is always yours and you never feel like it is. I went in because there is a way your feet ignore you when the part of you that lives in stories is strong enough. The stone was not a stone I wanted to see. It had a surname that is mine and my father's and my mother's if you speak it with the old or the new. It had a first name that is not common now but was when my granddad was young. Under died it said Sunday. I went home and sat at the kitchen table and said to Mom, "What was Granddad's first name again?" And she said it without anything in her voice and carried on shelling peas. And I looked at the green half-moons and the way the light from the window caught the little white hairs on their pods and thought of the shape of that letter D on the stone. "We'll go see him Sunday," I told her. "Take him to the park. He'd like that," she said. He always liked the ducks. Sunday morning we went. The sky had that fine sharpness it gets in early autumn, the light like glass. Granddad was in his chair and made a show of huffing when I tried to button his cardigan, and then patted my hand with his papery one. He smelled of shaving foam and the talc the carers use. We went to the park. We bought tea that tasted like paper cup and threw bits of stale bread we'd brought in a plastic bag to ducks that didn't need it. He told me the story again of the time he'd put a coin on the railway track and gone back to find it flattened, and something in his father's voice when he confessed had made the world stand still for a second. He laughed at the same place he always laughed. We took him home and Mom made him a sandwich he didn't really want. We settled him in his chair with the telly on. I sat in the corner where the light is worst and watched the clock in the hall. Nothing happened. That's the problem with telling stories like this. Nothing is the thing that happens, and it isn't a thing you can put into a shape. He fell asleep with his mouth open. The TV showed a quiz where people had to name counties and got them wrong in a way that would make him tut. At 5, Mom said she'd do tea. At 6, the carer came and smiled at us both with her tired eyes. At 7, the news had nothing on it that was ours. We went home and Mom said see, and I said see, and the relief was thin and enormous. At 10:30, the care home rang to say he'd passed quietly in his sleep, and Mom put the phone down and made a sound like someone dropping plates. And I stood there and looked at the place where the phone had been and knew exactly which stone the man had pointed to, and exactly what my place in this was, and nothing at all about whether anything we do counts as changing anything or only walking along it with our eyes open. I still see him. Not every night. Not even every week, not always. He is a season I pass through. Sometimes, I'll go a month in which all I do is sit in class and write things and share a packet of crisps with Lewis and kiss someone behind the sports hall and learn to unhook my hand from the feeling I didn't do enough. But then I'll pass St. Mary's and the gate will be open the exact amount the gate has always been open before. And the man in the old uniform will be there with his neat cap and his face not quite there. Like you're squinting at a TV just off channel, and he will lift a hand that points toward a name you know or you don't, and a date you can carry around like a stone in your pocket, or you can throw into the hedges and pretend you didn't hear it land. Sometimes, I think he's a warning, a mercy dressed like duty. Sometimes I think he's a habit the town has, the same way we have the gala in summer and the lights switch on in winter, and the sound of the quarry at night when all else is quiet. Sometimes I think he's what happens when too many people have died on your road, and the old stones get tired of being looked at in only one way. Lewis says he sees nothing most nights and something only when I'm there, and that makes me wonder if this is my job and not his. Reverend Holt moved the candle stand nearer the door sometime in October, and now it's the first thing you see when you come in, as if he knows people like me who don't always want to walk all the way to the front. Often I do nothing with what I'm shown. This is true, and I won't dress it up. You can't fix the shape of the day. You can only turn the attention on it like light. I have knocked on 2 doors and been told to get off the step. I have sent messages that were answered with, "Who is this?" I have stood outside a fish and chip shop and watched a man with the carved name on his shoulder carry boxes to his car, and then drive away, and that was all. Somewhere in this is a kindness I can't describe. Last week, I was coming back from the bus into town. There's another bus now, a newer one with a driver who doesn't know our names yet, and I cut through St. Mary's because the hard things become habits and your feet like to find what they know. The gate was open and the path was a straight, clean stroke. He was there as if he had never not been. He lifted his hand and pointed past me, but not to a stone in the old part. He pointed to where the newer graves are, where the names are shiny and cruel. I went because I always go. The stone there was blank, smooth, pale. Nothing was carved on it yet. I looked back at him and he didn't move. I put my hand on the cold of it and wondered if blank can also be a word. I told myself I wouldn't go tonight. I told myself I would take the longer way and listen to the Fletcher Spaniel's bark and watch the light above the allotments, and be a person who goes home and watches the bad quiz shows and eats whatever Mum put in the freezer for tea. On the corner, I stopped. The world was very ordinary around me. Someone had hung washing and the shirts blew in the same small movement they always do. The chippy oil smell was a friendly hand. My phone buzzed in my pocket with someone asking if I'd be out later. I looked at the gate. I couldn't see him yet. That didn't mean anything. Maybe the blank stone is mine. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's yours. Maybe it's where the name of one of the men at the garage will go. And I'll be there when the light on the phone pulses and the sound of Mum in the other room goes quiet. Maybe it's nobody's and he wanted me to touch it and know that sometimes not knowing is all you get. I stood there long enough to make my legs ache. I walked away because you can always walk away. When I reached the bend, I turned and looked back, and for a second I thought I saw his cap, just the band catching light, and then it was only the top of the gatepost shining where the paint is rubbed smooth by hands. If you walk through St. Mary's after midnight, you may see him. You may not. If he points, you'll decide whether to follow. You will think that this choosing is everything. The truth is quieter. The truth is that some nights are only stones and some nights carry names. The truth is that I keep expecting to reach a night where I'm sure I did the right thing, and this night belongs to that group of nights where I am not. I got home and the house was warm and somebody had left the hallway light on, and my mother called my name like she does. Ordinary, as if I was just in from a long day. I said yeah, and kicked off my shoes and watched the little constellation of gravel they left on the mat. I sleep sometimes now, not always. I dream of mud and carved letters and the gloved hand that indicates. In the dream, I think I can see his face if I go just a bit closer, and in the moment before I step, I know the shape of it the way you know your own reflection in the window when the lights are off behind you. Then I wake up and the room knows me back. The radiator clicks like a watch. The world holds. Morning comes in the same tired way it always does, and somewhere in it a gate waits open exactly the amount it always was. I used to laugh at the kind of stories that creep up at the end of a long night. You know the ones. My mate's cousin swears he saw a face in the dam. Or, there's a road just out of town where a white ute follows you with its lights off. I thought that stuff was for kids, trying to scare each other after football practice. Then the thing at the old cemetery happened, and I learned two things. First, dirt moves like water if it wants to. Second, there are places in Victoria where you can disappear in front of your friends without leaving a mark. This was in 2008, the tail end of year 10, in Ballarat. If you're local, you'll know the cemetery I mean. The one tucked behind the line of gums that rattle in the wind like a warning. The town's still proud of the gold rush. But once you notice how many graves belong to miners, you stop feeling excited about the past. It's all right there. The hard work and bad luck stacked under lichen and sandstone angels with broken wings. On weekday afternoons, kids cut through the grounds on the way home. On weekend nights, idiot teenagers like us take turns proving we're not afraid. It wasn't my idea to go. It was Liam's. He was the kind of guy who could get you to do something stupid with a grin and a shove. Broad shoulders, chipped front tooth, endless energy like a dog who never learned the word no. He'd passed his L plates and wanted to show off the family Falcon, which he called a heritage vehicle, like he'd just been put in charge of it by a museum. He said we were going to drive up, drink a couple, and do graveyard Olympics. It sounds worse than it was. The plan was more mock sprinting between headstones and less vandalism. Mostly we wanted to scare ourselves and then go home and text about it. I expected something dumb but normal. That isn't what we got. There were 4 of us, me, Liam, his girlfriend Jade, and Connor. I felt responsible for Connor because he collected bad choices like stickers. He wasn't the brightest, but he was loyal and funny. And he had this way of telling a story that made boring stuff feel like a dare. He was the one who would lean over the edge of a bridge to see how far it was, or touch the hot pan because the sizzle sounded interesting. We'd known each other since primary, where he'd once eaten paper to make a substitute teacher laugh. That night he showed up with a beanie half over his eyes and a packet of sour lollies he would not share. We hit the cemetery just after 11. The air was cold enough to feel clean. The moon hung behind a thin quilt of cloud, the kind of light that made the marble glow. A wind came down from the hill and rattled the gum leaves so they hissed like a crowd shushing us. We stood at the iron gate long enough to hear our breathing. Liam clicked the falcon locked and slung an arm around Jade. She tolerated the cemetery idea because she didn't like being left out of stories we'd all be telling later. She was the sensible one, always with a plan for getting home safe. She had a torch in her jacket pocket because of course she did. Rule 1, Liam said. Respect. No damaging, no stepping on the headstones. Rule 2, Jade said. No running if you fall. You'll break your leg. She looked at me as if I was the most likely to sprint blindly into a hole. Maybe I was. Rule 3, Connor said, popping a lolly in his mouth. If a zombie pops up, we leave Liam. He's the most meat. We wandered between rows of old graves, reading names you can find in any cemetery. Johnsons and Thompsons and babies who hadn't made it past winter. Jade's torch picked out details like a photographer's flash. A stone rose carved so delicate you could almost see petals. A carved hand pointing up with a missing index finger. A little cast iron fence rusted to flakes around a family plot the size of a bathroom. I remember the part that made me want to leave. It wasn't a ghost. It was a blowfly sleeping on a statue's lip. You don't think a blowfly's sleeping. It reminded me everything lives by its own rules and only sometimes by yours. I said, I'm cold, which was code for I have a bad feeling, and Liam said, 2 more minutes, then we'll bail. He pointed toward a rectangle of fresh-cut earth shaped like a trench. Look, funeral tomorrow. They must have dug that today. The grave didn't look like a hole. It looked like a wound. The edges were neat, but the soil piled next to it was damp and red-brown, almost black at the bottom where water sat. It was wider than my shoulders and maybe 2 meters long, with a nylon tarp stretched halfway over like someone had tucked it in. A white string grid cut across the opening, pegged with little flags. A clipboard lay against a stake, raindrops puckering the paper where the morning dew had just begun to fall. Jade said, "Don't." She didn't have to specify what. The idea telegraphed itself from Liam to Connor like a spark. "Don't even think about it," Liam said. "Relax, I'm not jumping in. I'm not an idiot." He was already stepping closer. He squatted at the edge and peered down. "They go deep, hey?" Something in my stomach clenched. I can't explain it better than that. I had a flash of myself trying to get out of a swimming pool without a ladder, that panicky clawing at water and slick tile. Dirt isn't smooth like tile, I told myself. There are handholds. If you really had to get out, you could. But I remembered something from science about how soil can collapse if it's saturated. I said, "Back up," and my voice sounded too sharp. Connor laughed. "Look at you two. It's a rectangle. It's not haunted." He stepped over the guideline and stood at the head of the grave. Imagine being the first person in every morning who has to check it. Poor bloke probably makes a joke every time. Hope he's funny. He looked down at the smooth dark. He had his hands in his pockets and that grin he got when he was going to do something, and wanted you to dare him not to. $10 if I go in and lie there." "Don't," Jade said again. "Please." 20, Liam said, because he could never resist upping the stakes. Connor turned to face us, put a hand to his chest like an actor, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to my rehearsal." Then he swung his legs over the edge and dropped. He didn't fall. He sort of slid like a coin into a slot, hips bumping the side, shoes kicking out, and then he was on his back in the grave. He put his hands behind his head and stared up at us with the most annoying smirk I've ever seen. "Feels like home," he said. There's a moment after a joke where laughter is supposed to arrive. It didn't. The wind went quiet, which made the sound that came next carry even better. The dirt next to Connor's ribcage gave a small sigh and settled. The movement was ridiculously slight, like someone pressing a pillow down on a sleeping cat. The soil didn't cascade. It leaned on him. Connor's smile stiffened. "All right," he said. "Okay, help me up." Liam reached for his hand, but by the time their fingers met, the soil had adjusted itself and pressed down. It was absurd and gentle and relentless. It didn't pour. It rearranged as if something vast beneath us had taken a breath. The nylon tarp folded a little. You could hear grains sliding, that soft whisper you get when you pour sugar into a bowl. "I can't move my arm," Connor said. He wasn't joking. You can tell when someone's joking. His voice does a high thing when it's real. "Oi, pull me." We pulled. We pulled so hard my shoulder lit up and Jade grunted. Connor's hand slid in ours like we were trying to pull a glove off the earth. His elbow cleared the surface and then the dirt slipped and took him back to the armpit. He winced. Guys, stop moving, Jade said. She was kneeling now, her torch between her teeth. She put both hands around his wrist. Stop moving, you're making it worse. I'm not. He was breathing faster. The soil shifted again and there was this sickening impression of fingers. Not real fingers, I know that. But the pattern of pressure looked like a hand had closed on him. Liam swore. He leaned forward with both knees and got his other arm. Jade looped the white guideline around his forearm as if it could anchor to air. It slipped. Back the car up, I said. Rope, tow strap, anything. There's jumper cables, Liam said. Then, keys, where are my keys? In your pocket, Jade snapped. Go. She didn't look at him. Her torch was in her mouth again and her hair had fallen forward and she was pulling with all the strength in her hands. Connor, breathe. Help, Connor said. It was the first time he'd used the word. He didn't yell. He said it like an apology, and then the soil at his sternum patted him again and you could see the breath go out of him. Not dramatically. Just a little compression that told you something could make room in you that you didn't intend to give. Liam sprinted for the Falcon. I heard the car beep and the boot thump, and then he was back with jumper leads that looked ridiculous, like we were going to jumpstart the earth. We looped the rubber around his chest and tried to wedge the clamp under his arm to make a handle. The clamp bit into skin and he yelped, and the dirt slipped over the clamp like a blanket swallowing a toy. The back and forth probably lasted 20 seconds, but it felt like we were already losing him. When the earth wants something back, it doesn't argue with you. It just closes. It swallowed him in increments, each the size of a breath. By the time Liam thought to get the Falcon's toe strap, the soil had reached Connor's collarbone. He had stopped swearing. He kept saying our names as if he were trying to keep each of us in the world with him. Jade, Liam, Maddie. No one calls me Maddie except my mom and Connor. He said it like a lifeline. He said Maddie. And I reached so hard I scraped the skin off my wrist against the shovel-smooth wall and I did not care. The last solid thing I felt of Connor was his knuckles. It was such an intimate detail that it destroyed me. He squeezed, just once. And then the dirt pushed between our fingers and unthreaded us like laces. The ground has patience, it insisted. It took him to the chin and then to the lip, and I remember thinking absurd things like how annoyed he got when sand got in his shoes at the lake, and how he'd hate this. Then it took his mouth and his nose, and we were yelling his name into soil, and then it took the rest. We didn't run, which surprises me. We acted like the opposite of panic. We scrambled for help in straight lines because if we deviated, we'd fall apart. Jade called 000, voice clipped and terrifyingly calm. She gave the location the way her dad taught her. She said the word entrapment, which is one of those heavy words that makes dispatchers sit up. Liam grabbed the clipboard. It said the funeral was at 10. A sticky note had the name of the gravedigger. Liam called him and got a voicemail and left a message full of breakage. I ran the towel from the boot down the line of graves to find anyone else who might be there. It was just us and the wind coming back in little puffs as if the trees had been holding their breath. The first to arrive wasn't police. It was a man in a yellow high-vis jacket who must have lived closer than anyone. He was the groundskeeper, or maybe the gravedigger himself, depending on how formal your job titles are. He had a battered hat and a torch like a stubby. He walked up and looked at the grave and put his hand on his heart like he had to steady it. Then he knelt and pressed his ear to the soil. He murmured something I didn't catch. A prayer or a name. When he stood, his face had gone the color of driftwood. How deep, he asked. Not that deep, Jade said. He wasn't that deep. The man nodded like he'd expected that answer. He said, I'm sorry. And then he did the first thing that made me want to hit someone. He picked up a shovel and started smoothing the little piles we'd scraped up, like he was tidying the edges. Jade grabbed his wrist. What are you doing? He met her eyes. Leaving it alone. He's under there, Liam said, voice cracked. We have to dig. If you dig, the man said, you'll collapse it again and again. You'll drown in it. He said it gently. He pointed at the soil, at the way it had slumped in smooth shoulders. This ground is riddled. Old shafts, tunnels, pockets. Sometimes the earth sits quiet for 100 years. Then it shifts. If we dig without shore and ladder and proper support, we make a funnel, not a rescue. He took a second breath. The SES are coming. They'll know what to do with shoring. When the police showed, their lights washed the headstones blue and red until I wanted to scream at the color. 2 officers, both older than us but young for uniforms. Stepped out and did that quick assessment you see in people used to emergencies. One's nameplate read G. Peters. He crouched like the groundskeeper had and put his hand on the soil, almost reverent. Then he looked past us like he was counting the minutes he didn't have. He told us we were to stand back. He asked for our names. Liam gave the list like he was reading an attendance roll at a school where they might expel the building. I watched his hand shake and thought, that's good. Someone will care that we were shaking. SES volunteers arrived with orange overalls and more calm than I could understand. They told us exactly where to stand, and they strung high-vis tape around the grave and they put timbers down. They talked about shoring and slippage and water tables. Someone fetched a diagram from a tub and propped it on the ground. It had a cartoon man trapped under soil like a child's drawing. They drove in stakes and wedged rectangles of plywood against the sides and built a box out of strength. It would have been comforting if the earth hadn't decided it was done with us. They didn't find a pocket. They found firmness all the way down until the head of the shovel rang against something hard the size of the grave. No, not something. Someplace, timber, a plank. The SES woman in charge swore under her breath, then said, historical cribbing, like an apology to the dead. Beneath the grave, old miners had laid timber a lifetime ago to shore in their world. We'd found an echo of a tunnel roof. There was nowhere for a pocket to swallow him except around edges we couldn't reach. The more they shored, the more they risked sliding sideways into void. They stopped. They looked at each other and looked at Peters. Can you hear him? Jade asked. It had been 14 minutes since he vanished. 15, 16. I'll be counting those numbers the rest of my life. The SES woman put a thin metal tube into the soil like a listening straw and tilted her head. She blinked. She shook her head. She said she was sorry. She said they would keep trying, but they had to be careful. The words grew formal. Condolence words. Words that smell like hospitals. I don't remember what happened between that and dawn. Someone wrapped a foil blanket around my shoulders. Someone gave Jade water. Liam called Connor's mom and broke in the middle of the first sentence. The groundskeeper made tea in a thermos nobody wanted. The wind was back and it had found its voice. It ran through the gums and sighed like tires on wet road. When the hearse pulled in at 9 for the funeral that was actually scheduled, the whole place went quiet again, like it had before the movement. I'd like to tell you they stopped the burial. I'd like to tell you they exhumed the area, excavated it, scanned it, pulled out our friend, took him to the hospital, gave him back. That would be a story with a clean shape and a moral about safety or listening to your fear. The reality is smaller and meaner. The funeral director walked up, took in the tape and SES and the expressions and spoke quietly to Peters. People began to arrive, dressed like they were going to church. An old woman with gray hair touched my arm and asked if I was all right, and I said, "Our friend," and the rest of the sentence didn't know how to come out. Peter squeezed my shoulder once like he meant it and then stood straighter. He spoke to the family in a gentle voice that didn't say what he was saying. The groundskeeper held his hat in both hands. Then, very carefully, 4 men carried a coffin past the tape and lowered it into the space we'd been staring at all morning. They weren't ignoring us. They were obeying gravity and time, which are harsher than any law. It didn't feel like they were burying on top of him. It felt like they were sealing the lid on what had happened. The way you close a fridge, not because it's empty, but because you can't stand looking at the space where something should be. The coffin thunked softly against the straps and rested there, a neat weight in a hole that had decided it was full. The priest said words I couldn't hear because my ears buzzed. Soil that had eaten my friend accepted the rest politely and turned smooth under the rake. By 11, the grave looked done. If you'd walked in at that moment and read the name on the funeral card, you'd think you knew who lay beneath. People always ask if we went to the police and lodged complaints and investigations and searches. Yes, they took statements. They did their jobs. Weeks later, 2 men from some department in Melbourne came up with a machine that could send beeps into the ground and listen for beeps back. They ran a grid. There was a space under the timber, but it twisted away like a drain, narrow as a throat and shaped by groundwater. They said old mine workings can spider the land in ways that make maps into lies. They said if a pocket shifted, it could pull like quicksand. They stopped using the word rescue after the first day and replaced it with recovery, and then they replaced that with unlikely. I stop the story there when I tell it to strangers because they prefer their horror clean. If you want the rest, you carry it with me. 2 weeks after the funeral, Jade texted us at 2 in the morning. Her texts were steady, 2 lines each, like she was trying to make the messages themselves not panic. Are you awake? Please answer. I went out to the porch so I wouldn't wake my parents and called her. She was whispering, which is how you can tell someone is truly frightened in a house full of people who might hear. She said she could hear tapping. I asked from where. She said from my floor. It wasn't constant. It was in groups. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3. I told her it was the house settling. She told me it matched the way Connor tapped our table at lunch whenever he wanted my attention. The rhythm you develop with best friends without meaning to, like a secret knock. I said, maybe you're noticing it now because you're thinking about him. She said my name without anger. It was worse than anger. The next day, a man in a suit came into the mechanics where Liam's dad worked and bought petrol and a pie. He asked who owned the Falcon with the P plate. He said he'd heard about the boy who'd gone missing and had something to show. He wasn't an official. He was someone who loved the sound of his own knowledge. He had a plastic folder of old maps and photographs of the cemetery from the 1870s, when the town swelled with men who chased gold into holes. He laid them on the counter like trading cards. He pointed at dark rectangles. He said the cemetery had been expanded over old workings, which is not unusual, and that the older shafts had been cribbed, with timber that sometimes lasted 100 years and sometimes didn't. He said he'd heard a story when he was a boy, about a sinkhole that opened under a horse's hoof and took the animal up to the chest before the ground firmed. The horse came out shaking and they filled the spot with rock. He smiled like a magician finishing a trick. Liam's dad asked if his filing cabinet was interesting too and closed the folder for him. He told him to leave. You get good at being in rooms with people who want to help and cannot. Teachers, counselors, uncles with opinions. A lady from church who brings a cake like sugar can patch the hole you carry. They mean well. They stand near you and speak softly. They're standing at the top of the grave. I tried being angry. It worked for a while. I imagined the earth as something with a mind, and I wanted that mind to suffer. I would kick at divots in the oval and picture groundworms as tendrils I could snap. It felt ridiculous to be at war with dirt. We are all going to be in it one day. That doesn't mean you forgive it for being greedy. 3 months after the burial, I went back. I know how that sounds, but it was winter and early morning and no one would be around to tell me to leave. I wanted to stand there and say something simple that would let us both go. The air bit my cheeks. My breath came out like steam. The cemetery felt quieter than it ever had, like a building before opening time. I stood at the grave and the headstone above Connor's name. It wasn't his headstone. It never will be. The family whose loved one lay officially beneath had had the inscription carved by then. A man's name and dates and the words dearly missed. I said I was sorry I couldn't smile at him. I said his family didn't ask for any of this. I put my hand on the soil and it was cold and firm. For a second that broke me. It felt like a shoulder, not someone's shoulder. That shape of human solidness you feel leaning against someone you love. I wanted to sink into it, the way you want to crawl back into bed when the alarm goes and it's raining. There's a hollow feeling you get in your stomach sometimes when you stand on a cliff or a balcony, and a part of you that means you harm whispers, jump. In the cemetery, I felt that feeling go the other way. I felt the ground thinking of me. It was not malicious. That made it worse. It was indifferent. The way a wide river is indifferent when you step into it with your clothes on. It receives you. It does not argue. I don't know if what happened next happened. I can tell you what I heard and you can decide. I heard tapping under my feet. Not loud, not close. 3, pause, 2, pause. A rhythm dumb as a nursery rhyme and smart enough to unmake me. I went dizzy. I crouched. I put my ear to the earth. It was cold and I could smell clay like wet hands, and I heard it again. Faint and respectful, the way you knock on a door when you do not want to wake the baby inside. I said his name. I said it with my mouth against soil so the word went where it needed to. I said a mate. The tapping stopped like someone had turned away. I didn't tell anyone about that for a long time, because there's only so much you're allowed to ask other people to carry. I tell you now so I don't have to keep it by myself. Sometimes I dream I'm the groundskeeper, and I have a set of keys that open boxes inside other boxes, and the last box is the ground, and when I unlock it, it swings up, and what's inside is light. Sometimes I dream I'm the man in the suit with his plastic folder, and all the photos slide off the counter and reveal a map with my name on it, and the lines wind under pages and into air like veins. Mostly I dream of the moment when his knuckles left mine and I had to decide to keep holding something that wasn't there or let go. Last month, Jade sent me a video from her phone. She was at the cemetery in daylight with her dad, who still doesn't love her going there, and she filmed the plot for 30 seconds. Birds chirped. Wind moved the grass. Nothing happened. She sent a second clip shot in her flat that evening. The camera pointed at the floor near her couch. Her voice said, "Listen." At first I heard nothing. Then I turned the volume up. You know the pattern. 3 and 2 and 3. I texted her to ask if she was okay. She sent back a heart and the words, "I am when we answer." Here's the part I don't know how to make tidy. The priest from the funeral came to see us individually months later, like he was doing a round of follow-ups. He didn't try to sell God. He sat at my kitchen table and took his collar off and called the situation terrible like he was pulling nails out of wood. He said, "There's a line we use, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that comforts people, but it's always seemed like a threat to me, and I loved him for admitting it." He asked if we had a ritual of our own. I said we text each other when we get home late so no one lies awake with a story. He said that counts. Then he said something I keep repeating to myself when the sound under the floor stiffens me. He said the earth doesn't keep us. We keep each other. If you're waiting for me to tell you not to go to cemeteries at night, fine, here it is. Don't. It won't make you brave. It won't make you interesting. It will make you familiar with how fast a joke becomes a silence. But the truth is, you can be taken on a Tuesday at lunch by a world that decides it wants a piece of you back. It can happen in a grave or at the beach or on the highway when the tires hum a note you can't unhear. What you can do is stand near someone and hold their hand until the last second you are allowed. You can answer when they knock, even if the knock is thin and far away and the answer is just your palm on a floor tapping back. Sometimes, when I'm alone and the house is quiet and a tram rumbles down the street soft as surf, I put my ear to the carpet and close my eyes. I listen for 3 and 2 and 3. If I hear them, I don't panic anymore. I can't dig him out. I learned that on a cold night in Ballarat. I do the only respectful thing left to do. I knock, same rhythm, slowly. So whoever is beneath me in the dark knows there's someone still at the edge, waiting with his hand out, counting the seconds he did not waste. I've gone back and forth about posting this because I know how it's going to sound. If you've ever traveled alone, you know that weird, lonely feeling that creeps in after dinner, when the crowds thin out and you realize you're in a place with 1,000 shortcuts you don't know, and a language you can only half follow. That's where I was when this happened. I was in Paris in late October, staying in a tiny hotel near Nation with a balcony that faced a brick wall. I'd walked all day with a paper map and a dead phone, the kind of stubborn tourist move I'd sworn not to make. And by the time I reached Père Lachaise, my feet ached, and the light had tilted into that late, honey-colored angle that makes everything feel colder than it looks. I didn't go there for anything morbid. I liked cemeteries back home the way some people like old bookstores. Quiet places where you can't spend money. I had a guidebook with a dotted path drawn in purple ink to Oscar Wilde and Edith Piaf, and all the names the internet told me to see. There were other people doing the same slow shuffle, pausing for pictures, murmuring in a dozen languages. A gray cat slid along a row of mausoleums like it was doing patrol. At one crossroads, I asked an older couple if they knew where Jim Morrison was, and we laughed because everyone asks that. It felt safe. That's important to say, because I need you to understand I didn't walk into anything that already felt wrong. It was a busy, beautiful place on a crisp afternoon. The hours posted at the gate said they closed at 6:01 p.m. I know because I looked. It was around 4:45 when I wandered up the slope toward the older sections where the tombs lean and crowd each other like an old city built before anyone planned streets. The paths traded asphalt for cobblestones, then for bare dirt. Every turn led to another, like a maze only half confident in itself. I got caught photographing a statue of a weeping woman whose face had weathered smooth, and when I took my eye from the viewfinder, the sky had shifted from gold into that flat gray that steals edges and makes distances tricky. Père Lachaise has these small signs on iron posts with division numbers and arrows, and if you keep one eye on those, you can always make your way back to a main path. I know that now. At the time, I let the signs blur into the backdrop the way you stop seeing exit signs when you're in conversation. I took 2 turns too many. I paused to check my map and noticed how quickly the living had thinned out. I could still hear the city in a soft way. Muffled sirens from Boulevard de Ménilmontant. the hiss of buses, but inside the walls, it was all leaves and faint footsteps that might have been mine echoing back. The first odd thing was a triangle of red and white tape fluttering between two mausoleums like a weak attempt to block a path. I stepped over it without thinking. The second odd thing was a low chime, metal on metal, far behind me. I turned and saw no one. When I turned back, I realized I'd drifted into a section where the mausoleums were tight and tall. The path compressed to something as narrow as a single person. The air felt a degree cooler. The names on the stones shifted from familiar to dense scripts and long hyphenated family names. It wasn't scary exactly. It was the feeling of walking down the wrong hallway in a building where every door looks the same and you're sure if you just keep going, you'll hit the lobby. I kept going, because that's what I do when I'm lost. I convince myself that forward is always progress. 3 corners later, I reached a small square where a tree grew at an angle, roots lifting a tomb lid in a way that made me look away fast. The light was dropping hard now. I checked my phone to see the time out of habit and found a black screen. Dead. I told myself 6 o'clock was still far away, that I could retrace. I chose the wider of 2 paths and took it. The third odd thing was a voice, not a word, just a throat-clearing sort of sound, ahead and to my left. Relief washed over me because it meant someone was nearby. I hurried toward it and came to a split where the left-hand path was dark and choked with fallen branches, and the right-hand path had a weak breath of light. I went right. The chime sounded again, closer now, then again, rhythmic, like the quiet ring a spoon makes against a thin glass. There's a point where you realize you've waited too long to fix a mistake. I reached that point at a wall. It wasn't the outer wall of the cemetery. It was a wall of stacked graves built like drawers, 6 high, each with a little door. The path ended there as if yanked up by a giant hand. I turned around and the path I'd just walked seemed narrower. I took several steps back, trying to find the fork I'd missed, and that's when I saw the lantern. It was moving along the top edge of a row of mausoleums ahead and to my right, weaving through trunks and into view, out of view. The flame was small, weak against the dim, but the way it swung was unmistakable. An old-fashioned lantern with a handle clutched in a low hand. I saw the glow on a sleeve, the suggestion of a coat, the hunched outline of a person whose shoulders had learned to accommodate a lifetime of cold. I felt stupid amounts of gratitude. I called out in English first, then the broken French I'd rehearsed in my head, something like, "Excuse me, is the exit this way?" The lantern paused. The person, man I thought, though I'm not sure, turned. I don't want to tell you what I saw because even typing this makes me feel watched. But if I don't say it, nothing else will track. He turned, and the light fell across his face, and his face didn't have features the way a human face has features. It was a plane of pale stone. Not the rough kind you see on a grave chipped by weather, smooth like it had been polished, with a hairline crack that ran from roughly where an eyebrow would be to where a cheek would narrow toward a jaw. Along that crack, tiny black shadows pooled. The lantern's light shivered along it. There was the impression of where eyes might sit, like thumbprints pressed into clay and then filled in. There was no mouth, or there was a mouth that was the idea of a mouth, an indentation that remembered how to be open. In that light, the stone almost shone. Here is the worst part, I still felt relief. My brain wrote in caretaker, night watch, someone who can fix this, even as my stomach turned cold and tight. He lifted the lantern just enough so that the flame sat between us and I could see the ironwork around glass, the tiny soot crescents on the panes. I stepped closer because stepping back would have admitted that I'd seen what I'd seen. "I need the exit," I said, my voice too loud in the narrow way. "I think I'm lost." I expected a shake of the head, a gesture. He lifted the lantern higher and the light fell on the doors around us, then up, until it licked the side of a name slab above my head. There are thousands upon thousands of names in that place. Names from centuries back, names with accents and hyphens and family titles. The one I saw directly over me was mine, not just my last name. The full name my mother uses when she wants my attention. The letters were stiff and strange in that thin chisel font, but there they were, carving light out of dark. Under it, 2 dates separated by a dash. The first date was my birth date. The second was blank. You know how sometimes your mind splits and runs parallel? One part of me went cold and clear, taking in the way the stone had a smear like someone's thumb had just pressed there and left a crescent of damp. Another part of me rejected everything and thought souvenir prank. the way tour groups do those photo inserts at tourist traps. Both parts of me stood still long enough for the lantern to raise higher still, high enough that I realized it wasn't lighting anything it touched. The flame reached, and tombs all around us answered like metal answering a tuning fork. Inside mausoleums and through iron grills and behind the little glass doors of votive niches, light bloomed where no candles sat. It was not fire. It was the memory of fire. The air shifted. It smelled like cold stone rinsed with old flowers and something like the bite of a winter match. I said something that wasn't language, and the lantern moved, just an inch, and from that inch, a wave went out. I saw light lamp-like behind frosted panes 2 rows to my left, then 3 to my right, then across the square where the angled tree leaned, then down the path I'd come like a whisper retreating. Either I began shaking or the ground did. The face, it's easier if I keep calling it a face, tilted a fraction. The crack caught the light, and for a second I thought I saw movement inside it, like thin things shifting as if something was waking up behind stone. I've been asked, by the one friend I told first, if maybe it was a mask, if some lunatic had put on a sculpted mask to scare people. I wish. The stone wasn't on a face the way a mask sits. It was the face. The neck beneath was wrong, too straight, too smooth, like those alabaster busts in museums where the fabric and the skin are all one material. He moved like weight moves, not like muscle moves. There was a drag to it and a heaviness that made the air bend. He didn't gesture like I expected. He tilted the lantern toward the path behind him, and without thinking, I stepped in that direction. I think I responded to the idea of being led the way a tired person responds to a bed. We passed a zinc door with a bas-relief angel whose eyes had been scraped off by weather into pits. The light in the angel's shallow hand guttered and went bright again. Off to our right, another path branched, then another. The lantern kept to a route that felt wrong. Where I would have taken the straighter option, he chose the narrow. Where the division sign arrows pointed one way, we veered away. Somewhere behind us, a motor coughed twice. The sound of the city entered and receded, as if the trees were pushing it back. I tried to think who else I'd seen last. A teenager in a beanie balancing on a low wall, 2 women arguing quietly over a map, the gray cat, the older couple laughing at me. Had they all gotten out? Was someone worried? My friend Elise was meeting me for dinner near Bastille. She'd texted me a thumbs up at 4 and then nothing. I imagined her calling my international number and hearing it go to nowhere. I tried to talk to the figure again. Are you the guardian? And the sound of my voice came back to me like a borrowed thing. He raised the lantern in a small notch of movement that could have meant yes, no, wait. The path opened slightly and then squeezed again, hedged by tombs so tight you could press your palms flat to both sides. I did to steady myself. The stone was slick and cold and faintly damp. When I took my hands away, gray dust clung to them in prints. The dust tasted sour when I licked a finger without thinking. We came to a small intersection marked by a cast-iron post with an oval enamel plate, Division 69. There was an arrow. Under the plate, someone had tied a plastic bouquet whose colors had done that bleached-out thing plastic does in the sun. The plastic rattled in a breath of wind that didn't touch the hair on my arms. Beyond the sign, the trees rose and interlaced, and in the weave was a patch of sky bruising toward full dark. The gate would be shut now, I thought. I didn't know if they sweep the grounds or if they lock it and leave you for the night. I didn't want to know. I moved closer to my guide, not because his shape comforted me, but because the circle of that flame felt like an answer to a question I hadn't asked yet. Do you know that fog that arrives at ground height? A thin brush of it? Not fog like a cloud rolled down a hill. It's the kind that sits low like breath spilled along the roots of trees. That started to gather. It made our feet quiet. It threaded the cracks in the cobbles, made a low river in the gutters. The light painted the fog the color of old paper. I remember thinking stupidly that the cemetery must generate its own weather. Then I remembered reading something about how stone holds warmth and releases it slowly, and I wondered what else stone held. We reached another square. This one had a bench. The bench was iron slats with curls at the ends, the kind that be leaving flaked paint on your clothes. A shape was on the bench. My brain said statue. My eyes said woman. It was both. She was made of the same smooth stone as the face of the man with the lantern, except her hair had been carved in careful waves, and her hands in her lap had fingernails. The nails were not painted, but the stone there was darker, as if people had touched them for luck. She sat as if waiting, head tilted toward the path we'd just come. For a snap of a second, I thought that was what the lantern bearer had been leading me to, that I'd be asked to sit. He did not pause. He angled the flame toward a wedge between two family tombs, a space so tight I would have had to turn sideways. I hesitated and looked back at the bench and saw, this is hard. The woman's head adjusted toward me, not much, a tilt you'd miss if you were thinking about anything else. The crack in the man's face caught light and I squeezed into the wedge because forward is progress, and behind me was a bench that watched. I scraped my shoulder and felt the sting through my sweater. The path on the other side of the wedge was different. The stones were larger and more even, as if at some point the city had redone this route for carts. The tombs here were lower and less ornate. The names looked newer. The lantern light didn't spread the same way. It was clipped, hugged close to metal. The air smelled like something electrical and fresh, like rain before rain. At the far end of this stretch, I saw a brighter rectangle and felt the meanest, sweetest jolt of hope. A gate. I hurried, my guide silent at my side, his steps heavy but quiet. A contradiction I can't explain. It wasn't a gate. It was a garbage area with a wire fence and a door hung open to a maintenance lane. The light was a security lamp with a bug halo. The door's opening framed a view of trees beyond, and then past them, a slice of the outer wall with green moss stitches. No exit. I said that aloud like the place might argue with me. The lantern bearer didn't respond. He lifted the light so that it shone on a narrow set of steps to the left. Steps so shallow you'd miss them unless you were being shown. We took them and came to a low terrace with a view over the slope I'd wandered earlier. Way down below, through branches and the scaffolding of stone, I could see the main avenue, the straight run that leads to the big gates. There were people moving down there. 2 guards in dark jackets, their shapes heavy with radios, walking with that end-of-shift pace. A tourist couple trotting to keep up. I opened my mouth to shout and the lantern's light tipped toward me like a warning. I don't know how a gesture that small could carry that much meaning, but it did. The breath stuck in my throat. The guards turned their heads together toward a noise I couldn't hear, then kept walking. Please, I whispered, because the whisper felt like all I had. Please, just, can you take me down? The lantern dipped once and I read it as yes. We started along the terrace. The fog tugged at my ankles like a small thing trying to get my attention. The names on the stones were familiar again. Laurent, Dubois, Bernard. One with a broken photo under glass, the face washed to a ghost oval. Another with a little metal fence around it like a garden. My foot knocked a small votive candle out of place and it rocked and rolled and caught on a crack and lay there as if it were tired. I bent to pick it up and put it back and saw in the glass a smear of dark like the soot of a burned match. I told myself stories about draft and dust. I kept putting one foot in front of the other because sometimes that's the only magic we have. We reached a flight of proper stairs. At the bottom was a straight stretch that would take us, I thought, directly down to the main avenue. The lantern bearer didn't go straight. He took a half turn into a passage cut like a secret between 2 tombs so tight that the light skimmed the walls and came back at us. I followed because I had followed this far and didn't know how to stop. The passage dog-legged once, then again, and then widened into a small yard, square and boxy, enclosed on all 4 sides by stone. There was no exit. No second door. In the center was a single upright slab as plain as a door itself. The slab was blank. No name, no dates, no cross, no carving. The ground around it was bare dirt, no gravel, no bricks. When you spend hours in a place full of names, a blank box is obscene. The lantern's light poured over it like water over a shoulder. Those parallel parts of my mind finally reconciled. I understood that I had been led. Whether that leading was benevolent or something else I still can't tell you, but I knew I'd been brought here on purpose. I stepped backward until my shoulder hit cold stone and I couldn't step farther. The lantern bearer moved to the far side of the slab, set the lantern down on the dirt, and for a second the flame leaned and recovered like it had to find its breath. He placed both hands, smooth block shapes where hands should be, on the top of the stone the way a person might put hands on a desk, and the crack in his face deepened, and the light inside the crack brightened like a filament catching. From the corners of the yard's walls, light answered. Not flame, not electricity. The same memory light I'd seen earlier seeped from seams, rose from joints, gathered in the spidered lines where mortar had cracked. It met in the air above the slab like threads of breath and hung there, a thin weave of brightness, not enough to see by, enough to be seen. In that light I saw that the blank slab wasn't blank. It was wet. The wetness had risen from the base in a shape like a rectangle lifted out of river water. The surface gleamed. Within that gleam Words pushed up like fish coming to gulp. They were shapes first, then letters, then my name again, full, the second date still blank. Something in me broke in two clean pieces. I heard a sound from my throat. It wasn't a scream. It was that noise a child makes when the world tilts and nothing catches. The edges of my vision went cotton gray. In the washed-out space in front of me, the man with the lantern lifted his face the way a person might lift a mask to check the fit. The crack widened. The implication of a mouth opened. I saw for a single cruel second something like breath move from the light to the stone, and the stone responded in a language that was not French or English or anything a mouth makes. It was the sound of brushes on granite in a workshop where no one works. It was the hush of a chisel eased from a seam. I don't know how long I was in that square. I lost the idea of time. I came back to myself with a thought as flat and clear as a road at noon. If I stay, I will be named. I reached down without looking and closed my hand around the lantern's handle. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because it was the only thing between us that I recognized as a thing made by people. The metal was hot enough to bite. I lifted and stepped back hard, and the lantern's flame wavered and then steadied, and the light thin as breath across the walls went with it, pulled like gauze. The man's head jerked in that heavy way like stone tilting. The crack in his face flashed. In the new shadow, the slab's wetness dimmed. The letters fuzzed. I ran. I ran like I hadn't run since I was a kid playing tag in the dark, not caring what I crashed into. I don't remember the path I took. I remember the sound of my own steps and the high, thin noise of metal hitting metal as the lantern's frame flicked against stone. I remember a scrape of nail on my calf, which may have been a branch or may have been a hand. I remember a field of light that became the main avenue, and two men in dark jackets turning with startled faces I will never forget. One shouted something in French that sounded like stop, and the other held up both hands like he was calming an animal. I tried to speak to them and found nothing. My mouth moved. Air left, no words came. The lantern smoked a thin line of dark that made their eyes shift to it and back to me. One stepped forward slow, palms up. I gave him the lantern because it felt suddenly hateful. He took it like it was a baby about to cry and set it on the ground. The other one looked over my shoulder into the dark behind me, and his expression changed in a way I think about when I wake at 3 a.m. He didn't look like a man seeing a person. He looked like a man seeing a storm build out of nowhere. They led me to the gate. The big, beautiful gate was closed, but there was a small door set into it with a lock, and the lock clicked and the door swung, and we were out on the sidewalk where the world moved as if it had never stopped. A woman in a scarf brushed by me in a hurry. A kid on a scooter kicked off. The blue light of a pharmacy sign pulsed. The guards asked me questions. They were kind about it. They asked if I'd fallen, if I needed a doctor, if there was someone to call. I shook my head and nodded in a way that made no sense, and then tried to speak again, and made a sound like an air leak in a tire. They brought me inside a small office that smelled like coffee and dust. The lantern sat on a shelf, dark now, as if it had always lived there. One of the guards, the taller one with graying hair at his temples, dialed a number and spoke into the phone and said something about un touriste and the words Purdue and chalk. And then he looked at me with a softness I don't deserve and said, in English, "It is okay." Elise found me there an hour later. After the guard called the number, I wrote on a piece of paper in block letters. She said I looked like I'd been rolled in flour. My clothes were gray with dust. There were gray prints on my hands where I'd grabbed stone. There was a neat, thin scrape on my shoulder that had bled exactly once and then stopped. She took me back to the hotel in a taxi. I drank water while she made me do the thing you make kids do after they hit their head. Follow her finger, say my name, hold up 3 fingers. I couldn't say my name. I could think it. I could see it. I could not get it past my lips. For 3 days I could not say my own name. I could say other words. I could say coffee and metro and thank you and please in 2 languages. I could say my friend's name and the name of the street our hotel sat on and the word for key. When I tried to say my name, my mouth would shape the first sound and then stop like something held it by the root. On the morning of the 4th day, it came back in the shower. I said it aloud by accident, the way you talk to yourself when you drop the soap. It burst out and echoed off tile, and I started shaking so hard I had to sit on the floor. Elise hammered on the door and I said it again through the steam just to be sure. I didn't go back to Père Lachaise. I finished the trip with small, normal things. Hot chocolate at a counter, a long walk by the river. a museum where people took pictures of paintings more than they looked at them. On the plane home, I woke from a nap with the sour taste of stone dust in my mouth and had to breathe into a paper bag until the panic let go. At home, I put the guidebook in a drawer and then moved it to the back of the closet with the winter boots, because I didn't like the way it felt to touch the paper. The part I haven't told anyone except here is this. The week after I got back, I went to visit my grandmother's grave. Different country, different city, a small green cemetery with a white fence. I took flowers the way she liked them, badly arranged and too bright. I stood there with my hands jammed in my coat pockets against a wind that felt older than the trees. I said my name out loud once to see if it still belonged to me. It did. When I turned to go, I realized the path I'd taken in was not the one I thought I'd taken. The little sign that should have said Section B said Section D. I made a square by accident and came back to where I started without meaning to. It was nothing. It was a trick of layout. That's what I tell myself. But when I walked past the maintenance shed on my way to the car, I glimpsed a shape through the open door. Hanging on a nail was a lantern. Ordinary. Modern aged metal with glass panels fogged by dust. Nothing like the one I held in Paris except for the shape of it, the way the handle curved for a hand. The groundskeeper saw me looking and said, "Old thing still works when the power goes," and smiled and went back to his work. And the sound of a small chime came from inside like the thin ring of one tool brushing another. I think about the blank slab sometimes. How blank isn't the same as empty? How a name can be in stone and in air and in your mouth and still not be yours, not completely. I think about how he didn't try to stop me when I took the lantern. How he let me lead the light away, how maybe that was the point. How maybe the place only asks that you carry a little of it out. Like pollen on a sleeve, like dust in a line on your palm. I have scrubbed my hands since then 1,000 times. The dust is gone. The smell revisits when the house is very quiet. A whiff of damp mineral and old flowers, then nothing. I can speak now. I can say my name to strangers with my hand out and a smile. I never look at the stone behind their shoulder in case it's already there. I don't walk after closing in places where paths multiply. When I hear the small sound of metal on metal in a quiet room, I turn on a light. It makes no difference. Light is just what names look like when they are thinking about us. If you go to Paris, go see the beautiful things and take your pictures and eat your pastries. If you go to Père Lachaise, make sure you leave before the hour. If you see a lantern where there shouldn't be one, go the other way, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much you want someone to lead you out. And if you don't, if you find yourself following because the flame looks like the only true thing left in the world, remember this one thing. When the light gathers where there are no candles and you see letters swell on a stone that should be blank, do not say your name. Do not even think it. Names are traps that open from the inside. Once they have you, they never stop spelling. I am not posting this for entertainment. I'm posting it because I need someone else to hold the memory of what happened, in case I start telling myself it was all swamp gas and nerves and bad audio. If you know the back roads west of New Orleans, there's a little parish cemetery tucked along a bayou where the cypress knees jut up like knuckles and the ground is always a little too soft. Locals call it Midnight Bell because years back, when they used to bury people with those safety contraptions, there was a bell on a grave near the back fence. The story was that a hurricane knocked the bell down decades ago. But some nights, way after the last boat wake, you could hear it ring once. They say it means someone made a mistake. We went out there because of that legend. I'm not proud of it now, but we had a YouTube channel. We weren't the Scream at Shadows kind. The four of us met at a community college film program and stayed friends. Liv handled audio, really knew her way around levels. Theo liked to treat locations like characters and let them breathe. Marcus was a practical guy. Lights and batteries and neat milk crates, always the one who asked if we had the permits. And me, I mostly took second camera and edited the builds that made us look a little braver than we felt. We had one more person that night too, Danny, who wasn't part of the channel but knew the area. She was the one who told me over Po' Boys that she'd heard the bell herself as a kid from the backseat of her mom's car and had never forgotten the noise. She described it as sharp and embarrassed, like a fork dropped in a church. We drove out just before sunset, down a road with more potholes than asphalt, passing shotgun houses raised on cinder blocks and a bait shop with a hand-painted sign that just said ice. There's a smell in that part of Louisiana where the sweet rot of the swamp rides under everything. Liv kept her boom pole broken down across her knees. absent-mindedly tapping the foam with her finger. Marcus had this laminated checklist he read in a mock-serious voice like an airline pilot. Batteries charged. Cards formatted. Consent assumed. He always joked at the end and we always rolled our eyes. We weren't trying to be disrespectful. We just believed the camera changed things by being there, and that maybe whatever people thought was haunted was just the way a place sounded when you listened too closely. The cemetery was fenced with iron pickets that had gone soft with rust. The tops bent like crooked teeth. The gate hung from one hinge but still swung with a hard scrape when Marcus pushed it open. The ground inside was uneven and pocked, a mix of family tombs and above-ground vaults, some newly whitewashed and some with the plaster flaked off in ragged pieces. There were low spots holding water that reflected a milky sky and one big cypress that had strangled a headstone in its roots. The back fence, if you can call a line of sinking bars a fence, backed up to a tangle of palmetto and sawgrass where you could hear frogs you'd never see. We weren't the first there. An older man was walking the rows, hat in his hands, stepping sideways around the puddles like he had learned the hard way how to keep dry socks. He had the posture of someone who had been born into that landscape and didn't fight it anymore. When he saw us, he squinted like he was trying to decide if we were worth talking to. "You folks the ones they said was coming?" he asked. His voice had been out in the weather a lot. We glanced at each other. Marcus said we'd called the parish office and gotten a name. The old man nodded. "That's me, Linger. I lock it up when folks forget." "You bring tents?" Theo said we were planning to sit up until after midnight, then pack it all out. Linger made a face like that saved him trouble. "Y'all mind the back lot," he said, pointing with his hat to where the fence gave way to underbrush. "Floodplain back there. A lot of sink. You can lose a shoe and then a foot. And don't set nothing on the Lafitte vault. They're touchy." He meant the family, but the way he said it made all the elaborately carved stone feel like it had a temper too. Danny asked him about the bell. He didn't smile. "Old man Crenshaw," he said after a moment, like he had decided to tell a story he had told too many times. He was the one had the bell. His wife swore he was a heavy sleeper and nervous besides, and she'd read about folks who woke up in a box and clawed till their fingers came off. She made sure. Wire cable ran from his hand to that little post with the bell on it. Wasn't nothing fancy. The storm we had in '92, the post went over. Rusted through. Her son hauled it off with the scrap. But folks, they say they hear it, not me. I got a clock that works. He looked at us like he was expecting one of those city laughs that tell you who's an outsider. And when we didn't, he nodded. "You hear it, you keep your feet where they are," he added. "That mud out back, and don't forget a footprint." He left before full dark, after checking a latch on a little crib-sized tomb and tucking a bouquet of plastic flowers out of the wind. When the sound of his truck died down the road, the cemetery got that hush that isn't silence, just all different living things taking their turns. The air felt heavy on the back of my neck. Mosquitoes woke up in a black cloud. Marcus and I set tripods. Theo did a slow walkthrough on the gimbal, getting those wide shots he liked that made the place look like it was breathing. Liv tested levels, her headphones crooked so one ear could stay with us. Danny made herself useful, tying a bit of flagging tape to a bent fence post so we'd see it if our eyes got weird later. We left a zoom recorder on the big vault under the cypress with a dead cat windscreen even though there was no wind. We put another near the back fence pointed toward the palmetto. Marcus rigged a cheap motion sensor by a sunken crypt that looked like a little stone house swallowed up to its eaves. It was the only one with iron bars across the front like a mouth. Theo set a static camera facing it and another one aiming back at us, because if he'd learned anything, it was that the interesting stuff happened in the corner of the frame while you were trying to be cool in the middle. Danny didn't like that crypt. I didn't either, but I kept my camera on it like a dare. The plaque above the bars was worn too smooth to read in the dark, and something about that made me feel like the names inside didn't want saying anymore. Swamp light is a thing too, and the LEDs did ugly things to it. Shadows seemed to jump a little when someone moved, not because they should, but because it was that kind of night. The hours between 10 and midnight stretch weird in a place without streetlights. We told stories to pass the time, the kind you tell to embarrass each other. Old class jokes and a story of Theo's about almost getting arrested for filming a church in Baton Rouge because the pastor thought a gimbal was a weapon. Every now and then a boat would drone somewhere past the trees and you'd get a ripple in the frogs. Then they'd start again. One voice and then another until the whole chorus synced up. It was more alive than any of us felt. Once a truck went by on the road and you could see, just for a second, a long white bar of light sweep across the tops of the headstones like a reading lamp in a library, and then it was gone. Around 11:40, the air changed. I have no better way to say it than that. You know when you swim and there's a colder layer down below and you drift into it without meaning to? It was like that. A different temperature moving across us at knee level, and we all felt it because we all stopped talking. Liv glanced up from her recorder and I saw her reach for the gain, like she was trying to catch something slipping past. Theo mouthed, "Did you hear that?" Marcus leaned his flashlight toward the back fence, not turning it on, just aiming it like he would need it soon. Danny had her arms crossed tight and her shoulders up around her ears like she was trying to make herself a smaller target. I know how momentum works in a group. If one of us had made a joke then, it would have popped. No one did. The frogs fell out of rhythm and then a whole section went quiet, like a cut in a track. A minute later, a shape moved in the palmetto that wasn't wind. The fronds have that dry bone rattle when they brush and whatever it was pushed through, steady and slow. I got camera 2 swung around and locked on the bars of the sunken crypt because I didn't want to say out loud what I thought I was lining up for. Nothing touched them. The rattle faded. I told myself it was a raccoon. It might have been. I've never wanted an animal to be more exactly itself. At midnight, Marcus started counting down under his breath. We hadn't planned it, but the number felt like somebody else's prayer when it came out of him. He was off by 2 minutes because his phone time didn't match Theo's watch and nobody said anything about that at the time. All I knew was that somewhere after midnight, when the 13th minute finally passed, I started to feel stupid. The way you do after a long vigil where nothing happens and you're stuck with the idea that you brought friends out to stare at the dark. I was opening my mouth to apologize when the bell rang. If you've never heard a metal bell do that in still air, you assume it will be a big cathedral sound. It wasn't. It was small and clean and mean, a single strike like someone flicking the edge of a glass with a fingernail. It cut under my ribs. You know those seconds after a firecracker goes off and your ears are full of the sound not sounding anymore. It left that kind of dent. The frogs didn't stop this time. They all started talking at once like they were arguing. Liv swore. Marcus said, "Did you get that?" And I heard my voice say yes, like it was happening in a different room. Danny had her hands over her mouth. Theo didn't say anything. He was framed on the monitor, backlit by our light bar, and he was trying very hard to be still. The bell didn't ring again. The motion sensor by the crypt flickered a false alarm and shut off. 8 ticks of some hammered bug kept time and then they were lost in the chorus. We waited for something else and nothing else came. And in that way where nerves and anticlimax make friends, we started talking too loud. We were shaky and sarcastic. Marcus patted the light bar like it was a dog that had done a trick. Liv did a little happy dance, the wire from her headphones looping. Theo looked at his own hands like he was counting fingers. Danny didn't look back at the crypt, not once. We broke down fast after that. It's like a superstition I didn't know I had until then, but it made sense to me that we should leave while the bell still only meant what it had just meant, and not anything more. We packed batteries and slipped the tripods and rolled cables one around the other, and I couldn't find the little rubber foot from the gimbal, even though I know I set it right by the cypress. It bothered me more than it should have. The night had a way of making small problems feel like holes in a boat. We didn't review footage right there, which we probably should have if we wanted to be accountable to ourselves instead of the story. We wanted out. The gate scraped the way it had going in, and Marcus shouldered it back into place and lifted the chain. No lock, just the idea of one. The drive back to town felt longer, a ribbon of black water without banks. We were quiet in that performative way people are when they want to convince themselves. Nothing got into the car with them. We set up to go over the audio and video at Theo's apartment because he had the better monitors and a couch you could fold your body into. He had a wall of potted plants we teased him about and a neighbor who hated us and the kind of place that always smelled like coffee making itself. We dumped cards and backed them up because Marcus insisted, and then backed up the backups because Theo had learned. Then we played the night back in 3 windows, like we were watching ourselves on a jury-rigged multicam show about 4 people, waiting to see if they had to feel foolish. The bell is there. Clean. You can tell when you know the timestamp, but if you didn't, it still punches. Liv smiled when we heard it through the monitors, her shoulders dropping in pure relief. We let it ring a few times for ourselves like an accomplishment, and then we rolled back and watched the few minutes around it because that's what you do. That's when things turned. Our faces were wrong. It took me a second to see it because your brain wants faces to be faces. But the camera aimed back at us, the one Theo had set to catch B-roll of reactions, showed 4 people, and then a 5th where Danny was sitting, and it was like someone had forgotten to render us. The eyes were smears, the noses stretched into new directions. The mouths were just soft blotted ovals. All of us were like that except for Theo, who was clear as day, every stubble hair on his jaw biting into the light. He was watching the dark like it was watching him back, and on film it looked like he was alone with it. We thought it was a codec issue at first. Lens smear maybe, moisture or some codec throwing a tantrum. We cleaned the footage cache. We tried different players. We pulled the same minutes from a different card. Same thing. We watched the other angles. Wide on the crypt, nothing funny. Static on the back fence, the palmetto fronds moving in that slow kindergarten sway. Wide on the oak, just the moss looking like hair in a dream. But when the camera caught us at any angle, the faces went to pieces except Theo's. He looked like he was lit for an interview, and the rest of us were under a fire blanket. Liv went pale and said, I had gain at -6, it should all be there. And the sound was there for everything but one thing, which we noticed when we scrubbed. Because when the bell hit on the wide of the crypt, there was something else, under it, for less than half a second. A dragging sound. Metal on stone, not loud, not foreground, but there. We argued about whether it was our sensor guard buzzing, or the wind jiggling the gate chain, and then we went quiet because on the crypt angle, which had looked perfectly still before, we noticed that the bars were shivering. Not much, but you know how a thin piece of metal hums even when your hand has already left it. It did that. Liv expanded the audio until it was ugly with pixels and there was a human shape down in the noise. A low voice on a cheap recorder. It wasn't a word. It was someone breathing through a throat full of something that didn't belong. We all sat there like a doctor had just said a word in Latin, and we all understood anyway. Theo didn't say anything. He rewinded the footage, played the bell again, and watched himself not flinch. He was still in the frame while the rest of us were monsters with melted faces. I think I said something flailing like, it could be a processing artifact, it could be you being in focus and the rest of us moving, it could be the shutter speed. Theo finally spoke. He said, do you hear that pattern? He meant the frogs. We listened and I realized I had been trying not to. The frogs were not random. It was 4 short croaks, then a long one. The bell, if it had rung again, might have fit in that pattern like punctuation. I went into the kitchen to pour water into a glass so I could do something with my hands. There were clean forks in Theo's drying rack and they looked like they were leaning all the same way. I stood in there longer than I needed to. When I came back, Danny was standing up and putting her jacket on. She was always the one who didn't like to be the first person to leave, but she was that night. She said, I have early going. She hugged Liv and nodded at Marcus and didn't look at the screens. She looked at Theo and said, don't go back out there. He said he wouldn't, and we all told ourselves we believed him. We planned to meet the next day and go through the long versions, pull frames, write a rational description that made it a good story that was still safe. Around 2 in the morning, I texted a clip to our little group chat anyway, the bell and the breathing noise under it, with a caption that was just, what do we call that? And then I set my phone face down and tried to sleep. My apartment backs up on a canal. Water always makes noise. I'm from land that doesn't, so I never had learned to ignore it. I lay there and heard what sounded like someone trying a doorknob that wasn't there because the doors are sliders. And then a bigger frog opened its throat and freighted the night with itself, and then, if you think I'm making this up, then I wish I were. The high metal tick of something small, striking something hollow once. Not near, not in my room, but unmistakable. The next morning I was late to Theo's because I had to stop twice for stomach cramps. When I got there, a cop was parked outside and the neighbor we hated was standing on the gallery with her arms crossed like she had finally won a battle. None of us knew we were fighting. The officer didn't ask me anything because I didn't say anything to make myself relevant. I just dialed Theo 15 times until his voicemail said the same tired sentence he'd recorded 2 years ago. Marcus got there before Liv and went up with the officer. When he came back down, his face had the gray look you see on people who don't have room inside for the picture they've just put there. He said there had been a fall, plant stand or shelf or something he'd been on to fix a ceiling hook, he said. It wasn't his words. He was repeating something he'd been told and trying to stuff the rest of it into the bag. You can tell me coincidence. You can say the night before made our brains organize random into pattern. You can say we were tired. That all might be true. But there are two more things, and I'm going to tell them the way they happened, and then you can tell me again how it was nothing. The first is that when we went back through the footage again, a day later after we had done everything we were supposed to do and hadn't gone to the cemetery again, like we said we wouldn't, we found frames we hadn't noticed. It was Marcus who saw it because he had the patience to look where nothing was supposed to be. On the crypt shot, right after the bell, there's a reflection in the shallow pool at the foot of the vault, just a little polish of water and a depression of sunk stone. In that reflection, if you key your mind to see shapes out of static, there are hands, not open, gripping. 3 to a side, maybe more, with the nails dark like they'd been in mud. The water doesn't ripple. The hands do. It's enough pixels that you could say it's anything. I wish it were anything. The second thing happened 2 nights after, when I woke to my phone buzzing at exactly 12:04 a.m. I know that time like I know my name now. The screen was lit with a notification that said motion detected on backlot, which was language from an app we never used because we never had the budget for real cameras. It was just sitting there like an alert from a ghost alarm. When I unlocked the phone, it was gone. No app, no log, just the time and my own stupid reflection in the black glass. I haven't been back to Midnight Bell. I hear it when freight trains throw their brakes in the distance, and sometimes in the pipes when my upstairs neighbor flushes. I hear it in the way an empty sink rings when a spoon slips. When I try to be objective, to structure a story so that it lives in the real world, I keep thinking of something Lemaire said without meaning to, when he told us not to move our feet if we heard it again. The mud doesn't forget a footprint. That line lives with me. It lives with me when I wake up with a thin, bright line pressed into the soft part of my palm, like I fell asleep holding something that I don't own. It lives with me when I play the clip and see Theo's face clear, and ours blurred and the bars trembling and the little exhale under the bell that the recorder brings up like a diver being pulled through a narrow hole. Told myself for a week that we had caught a good story, and that a good story was all it was. Then a message came in from Danny at exactly noon on a Tuesday. Just a single line with no punctuation. It said, "Please don't tag me." We hadn't tagged anyone. We hadn't posted. I don't know what she was asking not to be attached to, but it felt like a rope being cut so we wouldn't be pulled the same way. We didn't post it. We archived it and backed it up and pretended to workshop new ideas. We talked about a plantation tour we could debunk and a hotel that claimed it had a haunted elevator. The channel stalled. Liv took a job at a studio upriver. Marcus started working nights at a hospital, said the hours made him real again. This is as much as I know how to make the story obey the facts without trying to make it worth watching. We camped in a cemetery by a bayou. We set cameras. We heard one small bell ring at 12:04 a.m. The footage blurred every face but one. The audio caught hands on iron where we saw nothing at the time. A friend of mine fell the next day in a way that does not want to be looked at too long. And sometimes, when I'm up for no good reason at all and it's quiet enough for the night to practice its vocabulary, I hear that sharp, surprised note come from a place in the room where there's nothing for it to strike. If you happen to be near that stretch of road and you feel your phone buzz at a minute that isn't round, don't put your weight forward. Don't answer any invitations the dark makes you. If you're certain you hear nothing, all the better. But if you hear it, even far off, just one note like a fork in church, stand very still and count your breaths until you feel the ground decide to let you go. I don't want to start an argument about what I do for a living. People hear cemetery and think I'm either fearless or broken. Truth is, most nights are just cold air and the sound of foxes moving through ivy. My name's Liam. I'm 40, divorced, and until last year I was the bloke with a torch and a ring of keys at Highgate. Not the famous ghost hunter sort, the kind that comes with thermometers and YouTube channels. I mean the person who locks the gates, tells teenagers to put the whiskey away, and asks dog walkers to mind the graves. It's simple work if you don't mind quiet. I like the quiet. I used to. Highgate's got 2 sides, east and west, sliced by Swain's Lane. The west is older, almost theatrical with its Egyptian avenue and the circle of Lebanon. Those vaults sunk into the slope like a honeycomb for the very rich. The east's more modern but still crowded with angels leaning at funny angles, stone ivy that's outlasted real vines, and paths that wander between names you'll recognize if you read enough obituaries. On a good evening, the city is a hum like distant water. On a bad one, it's as if the hill is holding its breath. My second week on nights. I got paired with Tom. He was young, 26, maybe. Hair cropped like he'd only just left school, and he treated the place like a library. He was quiet, not out of deference to the dead, just because that's who he was. We'd do a sweep together and then split. He'd take the east. I preferred the west, where the paths narrowed and the greenery, if I'm honest, felt like cover. There's one story they don't put on the tours. I heard it from Martin, who'd done 15 years before me and retired with a limp. We were in the hut that first week, nursing tea that tasted like the metal of the pot, and I asked him about the vampire nonsense from the papers in the 70s. He rolled his eyes and waved it away, then said, "The only thing that's ever made me go white is the gates not wanting to open." He didn't mean they jammed, he said. He meant they wouldn't. The big leaf of the west gate would stick on a dead calm morning, like a hand held from the other side, and if you forced it, then you were asking for 3 days of trouble. Locks buckling, hinges squealing, alarms tripping at odd hours. "You wait," he said. "You wait and let it decide." I laughed because that sounded like a retiree's superstition. He didn't laugh back. "If it sticks," he said, "you don't go in. That's the whole of it." I filed that with the other cemetery folklore, robbers, black dogs, someone hearing organ music when there wasn't any. I didn't think about it again until November, when the clocks had just gone back and the dark fell like a trap at 4 in the afternoon. We had a storm warning that Friday. Not rain, wind. The sort of wind that makes London feel like it's lost its skin. By closing time, only a few late tourists lingered to take photos of Karl Marx and Douglas Adams on the east side. A couple had wandered into the west without a ticket, but they were polite when I found them and shuffled out apologizing. Tom was on the east, helping an elderly man look for a cousin's grave behind a crooked stone angel. I finished my sweep, checked the padlock at the top gate, and did my last slow walk down Swain's Lane to the main west gate. When I swung it shut, the metal rang through the ivy like a struck bell. You feel those vibrations in your palms for a while. It's not a bad feeling, like finishing something. We went back to the hut, signed off the visitor count, and took our tea into the quiet. The hut isn't much. A table with stains, a kettle that sulks unless you tap it twice, a notice board with laminated maps, and a no drones sign. There's an electric heater that makes the air smell like dust when it first comes on. The wind fussed at the corrugated roof. Somewhere a bin lid skipped and clapped. After a while, Tom put in his earbuds and leaned back, eyes shut, the way young people can sleep anywhere. I watched the hands creep around the radio clock and let the wind settle me. Around 2, the power hiccuped and the lights blinked. It was only for a second, but it brought me to alertness again. I went outside to smoke. That habit's why I like this job, and the city hates it. I stood under the hut's little overhang and looked across the lane at the west gate. In the sodium light, the ironwork was all shadow and thorn. The chains and padlock hung clean. Past the bars, a path curved down into darkness where the yews and beeches meet above like fingers. I heard it then. At first, I thought it was one of the bins again, or a fox shouldering into a sack. It was a soft thud, regular, like someone knocking from far off. I couldn't tell if it came from the hill or from the houses opposite. Then it came again. 3 taps, a pause. 3 taps. The wind pushed a breath into the lane and then went still. I stepped down the 3 concrete steps, stubbed my cigarette, and walked over to the west gate. It's heavy even when it swings freely, each leaf the size of a panel van. I put my hand to the cold of it and the knocking came again, this time a little clearer. It was coming from inside, not right behind the gate, but deeper in, somewhere downhill where the paths tangle and the trees close ranks. The rational brain will make a fool of you if you let it. Mine did. Someone's been locked in, a drunk, a vagrant. A kid's jumped the wall and can't find his way out. I put my mouth to the bars and called, "Hello? You all right in there?" On the air between the graves, the 3 soft knocks sounded like someone tapping the underside of a wooden table. When I stopped talking, the knocking stopped. I listened and heard nothing. No fox skitter, no bottle clink, just wind fussing the ivy. Then, quiet as breath, a voice. "Open, open. Wind will make words if you let it. Leaves rub. Branches complain. Even the ironwork whistling can shape syllables if the holes line up." I told myself that, and still my mouth went dry so fast I had to swallow twice before I could speak. I called again, louder. "If someone's in, shout. I'll come to you. Open." That time it wasn't the wind. It was a word with weight, as if pushed through a throat that didn't want it. It came from somewhere to the left of the main path, where the ground rises toward Egyptian Avenue, the walkway lined with sphinx-like stone and wooden doors. My body split in two opinions. One wanted to go back to the hut, lock the hut, wake Tom, call the police, call Martin, call anyone. The other knew this was my job. If someone was trapped and I didn't open because of a ghost story, then I was a waste of a high-vis vest. The gate didn't want to move. The chain, which had looked slack, pulled taut with a complaint that I felt in my teeth. I took out my keys, found the big padlock key by touch and fed it into the mouth. It turned like it always turned. The chain dropped into my arms with a heavy ripple. I lifted it away and leaned my shoulder into the gate. It stuck. Not on the hinge, not a scrape, a hold, as if the air on the other side of the bar had thickened to jelly. I felt the first sour creep of real fear. I leaned harder and the gate shifted a centimeter with a sound like a sigh through teeth. Another push and it gave, finally swinging enough for me to slip through sideways. Every practical thought I had tried to stand up again, get a torch, wake Tom radio. But the voice came closer now, open, and some hot pride or stupidity carried me through. Inside the west, the wind immediately felt different, quieter. You know that hush when you step from a busy street into a chapel? It was like that. Only the chapel was outdoors and the walls were trees and the roof was the dark sky. My torch threw a tight tunnel over the path. Fallen leaves made a sound under my boots like paper being folded. I swung the beam toward Egyptian Avenue. The old stones remembered the weather of 100 winters. Water inched down the filigree. The names and dates had softened into something a fingertip might know better than an eye. The left-hand side of the avenue is where the vault doors look like they should move if you said the right name. That's also where the old Victorians had installed iron gates behind the heavy wooden doors, as if a second thought had grabbed them at the threshold. Let's lock the dead twice. I called again, softer now. Hello, you need help? The torchlight wobbled because my hand wasn't steady anymore. Something knocked. Not a distant thud this time, but metal rattling twice, then a whisper. Open, open. It came from a vault halfway down, one of the ones with a lion's head motif where the door meets the arch. The iron grill behind the door was held by a chain that looked newer than the rest. Modern links, stainless, padlocked. The door itself had no visible handle, just two bolts that time had made decorative. Hello? I put the torch beam through the wood's gap, which was no wider than 2 fingers. What little light slotted inside made a triangle on stone. The chain on the inner gate shifted. I could see it with my eyes, not just by sound. A light ripple like someone had tugged it and let go. I knew that vault. The map called it Whittingham, 1870-something. Though the family name didn't matter to me as much as the memory that Martin had always spat when we passed it. We hate that one, he'd said once. I hadn't thought to ask why. I set the torch down so it shone across the threshold and took hold of the chain that held the wooden door shut. This one was old, black with age and rain, the padlock fat with rust. It made a ticking sound like a clock as cooling air moved across it. I raised the key ring. No key matched. We don't hold keys for internal vaults. Those belong to families, and most families haven't visited in decades. I put my ear to the seam of the door. No breathing. No shoe scuff. Yet when I drew back, something brushed the inside of the wood so gently it almost wasn't a touch. The chain lifted a fraction and settled. Then a shape, smaller than I wanted it to be, moved in the draft behind the grill. It could have been a shadow, a trick of the torch stutter as the batteries went tired. Then fingers. No, the idea of fingers. 5 lines in the dark where light did not go, came up on the other side of the iron and pressed between bars that should have been too close together for a hand. The steel seemed to welcome them. The smallness of the gesture is what did me in. A big thing, a shout, a crash would have let me say no and fetch help. But that smallness, that quiet asking, drew something human from me. Without thinking, I slipped a pry bar from my belt, fed it beneath the chain and leaned. Metal complains in so many voices. This one was soft and wet. The voice of a thing that's been asleep too long and doesn't want to wake. The old chain gave a link, then another until the padlock held all the strength by itself. And then that strength went with a sound like a cough. The door moved half an inch. Air pressed out, old and earthy and not like rot so much as a long-kept jar opened. Behind the iron, the inner chain shivered in excitement. I realized my childish mistake. The chain rattling had been from inside. Not a signal to me, but the only thing that thing inside could touch to make noise. Open, the voice said, Right at my ear now, though, the wood was between us. It had no shape to it besides the shape of the command. I pushed at the door. The wood stuck. For a terrible second, I thought I'd have to really commit, shoulders and all. Then it slid a little more, and I thought, if I just look in, I can see what it is. I can help if it's a person. If it's not, I can shut it, I can chain it again, I can... Liam, said the voice. I don't give my name out at night in the cemetery. I'm not that friendly. And I hadn't said it since we left the hut. Hearing it spoken with such careful correctness, like someone who'd practiced the syllables, stopped my arms in mid-motion. The torch rolled off the threshold and the angle changed, and for a second the beam caught a face in the gap between the iron and wood. But face isn't right. It was as if someone had carved the memory of a face out of smoke. Eyes were where eyes should be, but light slid off them. The mouth moved like a fish. I jerked back and the door swung inward another inch with the reflex. The inner chain snapped like a guitar string hitting the floor. In that same second, the cold that had been manageable became a blade sliding under my jacket. Under my skin, my breath steamed white and hung low, like fog trying to learn to crawl. The voice said, almost scolding, "Open." That command had something in it now, some second note of need. My hand, which had dropped the bar, reached for the door of its own accord. Every practical sense howled. Some other sense that had been asleep, something old, something obedient, started to stand. I would have done it. I believed that. I would have opened the door wide, and then I wouldn't be writing this now. The radio spat at my belt. A squeal of feedback, and then Tom, young and oblivious and living in a different world 15 meters away, said, "You outside?" Thought I heard voices. The spell broke like glass in a hot sink. My head cleared enough for one thought. No. I stepped back and pushed the door closed with my hip. The thing behind the grill let out a noise that was nothing like a person. It was a rush of whispers, layered like 50 people all telling me to hurry in slightly different words. The chain on the outside was broken, but I could wedge the pry bar through the iron ring and twist it to hold the door shut by friction. I did that with hands that shook so hard I almost dropped the bar twice. The sound behind the wood died away in a hiss that ended like someone speaking at the bottom of a well. Open, open. Then quiet again. Not the normal quiet, but the kind that waits for your hearing to come back. I didn't run. I wanted to. I backed out like a man leaving a room where a dog is watching him very closely. I kept my torch on my feet so I wouldn't look at anything else. If I'd seen the other vault doors moving, I would have broken. I would have run and tripped and been found in the morning with the leaves sticking to my face and no good reason why I'd slept on a grave. I took the path back to the gate and squeezed through and pushed the leaf shut as if the leaf were my front door with something bad in the hall. The gate settled into its latch with a satisfied click that felt too much like approval. Tom was coming across the lane, sleepy-eyed, radio still in his hand. "Everything all right?" he said. He peered past me toward the dark slope. "Wind's wicked. Someone's been in," I said. It was the only sentence that made any sense. A squatter, maybe. Inside one of the... I didn't want to say vault. One of the structures. We need the police. It came out with a professionalism I didn't feel at all. My voice trembled on the last word. He looked at my face then, properly looked, and whatever he saw made him straighten. We called it in, saying trespasser gets a quicker response than ghost. The Metropolitan sent a patrol car, and 2 officers came and stood with us at the gate while I told a version of the truth. I heard knocking, thought someone was in distress, entered, found evidence of tampering, secured what I could, retreated. No, I didn't go far in. Yes, I could show them where. The older officer, a woman with a lined face that looked kind in the daylight and cold at night, asked if I'd opened anything I shouldn't have. I said, no, I put my bar through the ring to wedge it shut. She nodded like that was what she'd hoped to hear. We went in together. 4 people is better than 1. The place didn't care. The air was the same chapel hush and our torches made islands. As we came to Egyptian Avenue, the younger officer muttered something about it looking like a set from an old film. The older one told him to mind his tongue. At the vault, they saw the broken chain and my makeshift wedge and did the exact thing I'd dreaded and hoped for. They took the wedge out. The door creaked inward a little. We all leaned reflexively away. The older officer shone her torch through the iron. Stone, dust, empty space. A plaque in Latin that no one there could read. No sign of anyone. No hand still waiting between the bars. She looked at the inner grill and shook it. The chain inside was indeed snapped. She held her torch so the beam ran along the metal. The break was very clean. Not rust, not old age, a cut, only not the kind a hacksaw makes. The edges were like glass. "You see?" I said, too loud, too ready for vindication. It was moving. "I mean, something could be kids," the young officer said. "Bolt cutters." "Then where did they go?" I said. "There's no footprints." I shouldn't have said that. There were footprints. Ours. The dust of 100 years keeps a record under the right light, and we'd just written our names across it in big letters. The older officer fixed the door shut again with my bar and said we'd get a proper chain and padlock in the morning. "You did the right thing, not going in," she said, and I could tell she meant it in more than the obvious way. On the path back, she fell in step with me and asked my name. When I told her, she said, "Liam, you hear knocking from inside again, you wait. You don't go in." I gave a laugh I didn't feel. She didn't laugh at all. As we reached the gate, her radio hissed and she turned away to answer. As she did, I noticed her badge number pinned at her chest, clear and bright. Not scratched out, not old. She caught me looking and raised an eyebrow. "All right," she said. "All right," I said. The absurdity of that exchange felt like a relief. They left after an hour of paperwork in the hut. Tom made us new tea and said, trying to be light, "I told you I heard voices." I didn't sleep the rest of my shift. Neither did he. We sat and listened to the wind worry the roof, and at one point the heater made its dust smell and I nearly jumped out of my chair. At 5:30 the birds started. They go first at the bottom of the hill, then nearer like someone turning up the volume along a path. At 6 it was light enough to see our breath had stopped being visible. We put on our coats to go open the gates. The west leaf didn't want to move. The chain was off, the padlock unclicked. I did everything right by the book, and when I put my shoulder to the gate, it sat there like a sulk. "It sticks sometimes," I said to Tom, who didn't yet know that phrase the way I was about to know it. I leaned harder. Nothing. I stepped back and looked at it as if the gate might be a person I could reason with. The street behind us was waking. Cars, a cyclist, a woman with a dog who nodded to me with the faint sympathy Londoners grant people who work outside. The city wanted in. The gate didn't care. "Leave it a minute," Tom said. He wasn't superstitious. He was just a patient man. We stood there in our high-vis, two idiots blocking a piece of history, pretending we'd meant to be doing this all along. The minute took 2, then 3. The gate didn't shift. The cold in my belly returned with interest. I heard Martin in my head, "If the gates stick, you wait. You don't go in." The words repeated like an instruction from a training manual you finally take seriously after the accident that should have taught you the first time. We waited. The woman with the dog looked at us again and went on. The cyclist said, "They opening today?" As if we were bus drivers on strike and he was just asking for form. I said, "In a bit," because the truth felt too thin to share. We waited 5 more minutes. Then, without any change in sound or temperature or breath, the gate gave. It didn't swing. It relaxed. The resistance was gone. Tom and I looked at each other, and we both knew we hadn't imagined it. He didn't say a joke. I didn't either. We opened the gate into the day. Inside, under proper light, Egyptian Avenue looked less like a mouth and more like masonry. The wedge was still tucked through the vault ring. We'd secure it properly once the new chain came. Tom went to the east to let in a handful of tourists already waiting with cameras around their necks, and a reverence in their voices that makes you forgive them for treating graves like exhibits. I put my hands on the wooden door of Whittingham because I wanted the reassurance of solidity. The grain was rough. A flake lifted under my thumb. Something had rubbed the inside, the way a cat will rub a door it wants to get through. The rub was at the level of a child's head if you want that detail, which I did not. I spent the day busy on purpose. Tours came. A school trip trooped through with little fluorescent jackets and restless feet. A man asked where Marx was, and I pointed. People cried, and the bit of privacy grief invents for itself in public. It was normal. The normality weighed enough that by late afternoon I almost convinced myself I'd had a scare and made a story from it. Tom left at 4. The heater breathed dust. The sky took its shirt off and the bones of the trees showed. I made a circuit of the west once more because that was my work. When I passed Whittingham in the dusk, I didn't look inside. I didn't put my ear to anything. I kept my hands to myself. I wished the story ended with me being sensible for the rest of my life. It doesn't. Another week later, the gate stuck again. I didn't go in. 2 nights after that, something knocked from deep in the avenue. 3 soft taps, a pause, 3 more. I kept to the lane and did nothing. The morning after that, the east gate refused us. Nothing dramatic, just a hold that made the hinges complain, then a letting go that felt like permission. That's when I started to understand that what we do up there is not just lock and unlock. It's bargain. We bargain our routine against whatever is old and patient and enjoys an ask. The last time I worked a late alone, a family came during the last hour. Mother, father, a boy of about 8 with a coat he didn't want to wear and a novelty torch. They'd come to find a great-grandmother somewhere along the east slope. We give people quiet and a map and a shout if you need, and usually that's enough. That evening, they didn't find her. The boy wanted to see the Egyptian bit because he'd heard about it at school, and his eyes went bright when I said he couldn't, that it was the West and closed now. Sorry. He asked me if there were mummies. His mom apologized for him. They left at closing grateful and tired. I don't know why I noticed the boy's torch roll out of his pocket and under our bench by the gate, but I did, and after they'd gone I picked it up and weighed it in my hand. Cheap plastic, dinosaur stickers, batteries rattling. At 2 that night the knocking came. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps. Then the voice, not loud, not hissing, almost conversational, like a neighbor over a fence. Open. I stood at the bars of the west gate and told it out loud, no. My voice sounded small enough that I could have stepped on it and crushed it. The wind shifted. Leaves ran like a rumor along the path inside. The voice tried my name. Careful again with my syllables, tasting each one like it had been practicing all week. Liam, it said. Please. That new word sat between us like something shiny on the ground that you know is bait. I gripped the boy's toy torch in my pocket so hard the plastic creaked. You'd think I'd forget to carry it. I never forgot. It made me feel like I had some private talisman, something alive that wasn't me. That night, with the voice using my name and the gate behaving like water that won't part, I understood what it wanted. It didn't want me. It wanted an opener. It wanted a habit. It wanted what it had enjoyed for a moment when a foolish man with a pry bar gave it a crack, and then had the nerve to take it back. Maybe it wanted the boy to come with his enthusiasm and touch the iron with fingers sticky with whatever sweet he'd been eating. Maybe it wanted the mother because she would tell him not to, and then he'd do it anyway. Maybe it wanted a policeman's torch beam and a badge that said authority and permission. I don't know. This is where you cut me off in the comments and tell me I'm making it up. Because fear rewrites what we think we saw. I kept my hand on the bars and said very plainly, there's nothing here for you. The voice made a sound like water over pebbles, like laughter disguised as river. Then it said a sentence I wish had any other words in it. It opens in the morning. The next day, the west gate stuck and we left it. We opened the east, tourists came, the day did its day. At 10, the whisper went around among the staff that a little boy had gone missing for 40 minutes near Marx's grave and was found sitting quietly by a cluster of angels. Not distressed, not hurt, just holding his dinosaur torch as if he'd been shown how to switch it on and off, on and off. His mother cried into the father's shoulder and then into a paper tissue and then into her son's hair. The dad looked around for someone to blame and saw only trees and sky and stones. The boy's torchlight found my face at one point and he lifted it and beamed it at me deliberately, as if to say, see, it works. I nodded. I didn't tell anyone that the torch had been in my jacket pocket all night. I didn't tell anyone that I'd put it back into his father's hand at the gate that morning, with a joke about kids and their pockets. I didn't tell anyone that the boy's fingers were warm and left a heat on the torch that lasted all the way to my hut. If you've read this far, you want someone to say, here's what it is, here's how to avoid it, here's the rule. I haven't got any of that. I can tell you what Martin told me, and what the officer repeated without smiling. If the gates stick, you wait. You don't go in. If you hear knocking from inside, you answer with silence. If something says your name, don't give it anything else. Names are how you get a rope around a thing, and ropes drag. I left the job after Christmas. Officially, it was early mornings and the cold my joints didn't like, and the new security firm that treats everything like a stadium rather than a hill with bones in it. In my head, it was a chain snapping in a way it shouldn't. A voice that learned my name too fast, and the knowledge that I had a small handprint the perfect size of a child's pressed into the dust on my jacket from the night I wedged a door shut with a pry bar. I keep the bar in my hallway now like a ridiculous relic. Some nights the flat is too quiet, and I hear my own central heating knock, 3 soft taps and a pause, and I stand very still and try not to make my name into a rope someone else can throw. If you go to Highgate, enjoy it. It's beautiful and strange and older than the stories people use to sell tickets. Walk with respect. Don't take rubbings. Don't leave coins on angels' toes. And if you're there at opening and the gate doesn't swing, if the person in a high vis looks like he'd rather be anywhere else and says, "We're a bit delayed," take him at his word. Have a coffee on Swain's Lane. Sigh and look at your watch and grumble about London. Then when you walk in finally and the air is its ordinary green hush, you'll feel, as I feel, something like relief, as if a bird on a windowsill decided not to come inside after all. You'll walk down the path and the city will keep talking behind you, and the trees will regard you like old friends, and you won't hear anything but your own steps. Most days, that's all there is. Most nights, too. That's the only reassurance I can honestly give. It's enough if you let it be. But if you happen to stand by the West Gate on a windy evening and hear 3 soft knocks from where the paths darken toward Egyptian Avenue, don't be clever. Don't be brave. Don't be me that first night with a bar in my hand and a rule in my head that I ignored, because kindness and pride look so alike in the dark. The dead of Highgate don't ask for much. They ask you to keep the door closed. If the gates stick, you wait. You don't go in. And if something inside learns to say your name, you pretend you don't hear it and you keep it. You keep your name for yourself.